The Prince of Dragon Magic. Book 7 of The Dragon Kings of Fire and Ice by Amelia Shaw. Narrated by Catherine Bilson. Chapter 1. Anthony. My biggest secret was kept by my mother and father. No one else knew. Not even my older brother, Karlak. I had magic. And the gift of sight. Just like my mother, Marianne, Queen of the Black Mountains. Mom always said that her gift created life and gave our kingdom, and those around us, many blessings. After all, it was because of her gift of sight that King Stavrock found Lucy, and years later their son Anselm found his mate, a human named Kayla. She was sweet, though not my type. I liked a woman with a little fire under her belt. Anselm, my best friend, had been ready to find his mate and had asked Mom for help. He could have asked me too, since I could see many of the same things my mom could, but no one knew about my magic, not even Anselm, so I was never asked. Mom was a sorceress, so her magic was an accepted part of her, but I was a dragon shifter like my dad, and everyone knew you couldn't be a dragon and have magic. Except, apparently, when it came to me. A magical freak of nature. Anselm and I had grown up together, more like cousins than friends, and the fact that he still didn't know about my magical abilities was beginning to eat at me. The discomfort of lying to my friend, or at least omitting part of the truth of who I was, had created a literal pain in my gut that wouldn't go away. I groaned as I reached over the dining table for the pitcher of water, pain tugging low in my belly. "Your gut's still giving you trouble?" Dad asked from the head of the table, where he was carving up his roast lamb pie with potatoes. My father had spent all of his childhood and teenage years with not enough to eat, so now that he was king, he made sure we all ate well, including our people who lived within the grounds of the castle. "Yeah," I said, putting a hand to my stomach as I poured a glass of water. Mom stared at me from her side of the table, her hands wrapped around her hot cup of tea. "What?" I asked, glaring back at her. "You know what I think it is." She took a sip of tea. "You need to stop lying to everyone, Anthony." I stared down at my empty plate. "No, I'm just hungry." I began piling food onto the porcelain. Potatoes and lamb and baked tomatoes. "Son," my dad said, "you're my heir, and I'm proud of you in every way. You're a good man. I don't know why you insist on hiding your magic from everyone other than the two of us." I wanted to roll my eyes at him, but had learned that would only get me a slap to the back of the head at best, and a magical detention in my room at worst. So I didn't. I may have been 26, but my parents were still my parents. "It's no one else's business." And it wasn't. I didn't want to be judged by everyone and labelled a freak. Or worse, have people I knew want to use me and my magic the way my mother had been used before my father rescued her from her monstrous first husband. Magic would not be considered a strength in our world for a dragon shifter. My gut clenched and pulled tight. I grabbed my fork and shoved food into my mouth. I was just hungry, I told myself. That was all it was. "Well, I'm off to visit Lucy and my granddaughters today," Mom said, standing up. "Would you like to join me, Anthony?" Karlak and his wife Jessa had twin daughters, born last year, and had spent the last month at Stavrock and Lucy's castle. I shook my head, part of me missing my brother, but the other part too jealous to consider visiting them right now. Karlak had been so happy since finding Jessa and becoming a husband and father, and of course I was pleased for him. But I did wonder if I'd ever find that level of joy. If I'd ever find my mate. I shook off the negative thoughts. I'd enjoyed the peace and quiet since they'd left, so I had to focus on the positives. "No, I have plans with Dad. Work in town." Dad nodded, and Mom sighed. "All right. I'll be home in a few days. But may I speak to you, Anthony? Alone, please." I glanced at my dad, who had just finished his last mouthful of food. He stood up with a smile. "Time for a shower. I'll meet you in the foyer in an hour." I nodded, and Mom went up to my dad and kissed him goodbye, their embrace too long for me to tolerate. I glanced toward the roaring fireplace instead of at them, trying not to flinch. I was an adult now, but still. Ew. "I'll see you soon, my love. Travel safe." Dad nodded and left the room. Mom turned to me, her eyes rippling with purple smoke, her magic clear for the world to see. I groaned, this time in annoyance. "What is it, Mom?" She'd lectured me for years about my desire to keep my magic secret, so nothing she was about to say would be new. "I had a vision last night." Oh, that was new. I sat up straighter, giving her my undivided attention. I might try and deny my own magic's existence, but I wasn't stupid enough to ignore my mother's visions. "What did you see?" It had to be about me, or she would have shared this vision with Dad, too. Mom chewed on her lip, worry clear in her eyes and in her aura. I dusted off my hands, even though they were clean, but it gave me something to focus on. I did not want to get into a weird push-pull of a discussion. "Mom, if you don't want to tell me, it's fine." I pushed my chair back and stood up to leave. "How much of your future have you looked at, Anthony?" I stepped away from the table and pushed my chair in. "You know I don't use my magic like you do, Mom." I'd never wanted her to teach me how to use my magic. I wanted to be a dragon shifter like my father, and I was. I didn't need magic, too. I was an aberration. The only shifter we knew to have inherited both skills of my parents. No one knew my secret because a sorcerer and a dragon shifter couldn't exist in the same body. Mom couldn't shift because she had magic. My dad had no magic because he was a shifter. It was wrong that I had both abilities. "I didn't ask for the vision," Mom assured me. "It came to me in a dream and stayed vivid on waking. I can't refuse the gift, Anthony. I have to offer it to you." She held out her hand, and I stared at her, long and hard. "I don't want it, Mom." I didn't want to know who my mate was. I didn't want to know the future. Life was complicated enough as it was, and I knew how much my mom had suffered for her gifts. That wasn't the life I wanted. "I know," she whispered. "But do you trust me?" The words hit me hard. Of course I do. I trusted my mother more than anyone in the world. She'd birthed me, fed me, and kept me safe through my childhood and teen years. She would move mountains, literally, for me, if I asked her to. There was no one more firmly in my corner than my mother. "Then take my hand," she whispered again, her arm shaking with the strain of holding it out. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. I could feel my magic rising up within me, reaching out for her and the power she wielded. I fell forward involuntarily and caught the edge of the table. I clutched the wood, not wanting to admit that I was afraid. Afraid of what my mum wanted to show me, afraid of what my magic would do once I opened that door. I'd never allowed my magic to learn or grow, consciously shoving it down into the black hole I'd created for all the parts of me I didn't want to admit existed. But here, now, I could feel it rising, bigger than ever before. "Please!" Mom gulped out the word, and I was propelled forward by my own powers. I lifted my arm and reached out for her, my fingers straining to meet hers as if of their own volition. When our hands connected, I was thrown into a world I'd long since stopped allowing myself to enter. I threw back my head, and my eyes slid closed as I stood up straight and held out both hands for my mother's magic transfer. There was my future, flashing before my eyes. A woman, with red curly hair, the flames of desire and passion whirling in her eyes. The image shifted, and real flames surrounded her. There was a child in her arms. Then the flames were gone. She dropped to her knees, begging me for help. I stood over her, shaking my head. Despite the fact I couldn't hear any words, I knew what she wanted. She needed me, my magic, and I was refusing to give in to her pleas. I wouldn't use my magic to help her or anyone, not even my own child. I gasped and pulled my hands from my mother's grasp, not wanting to see any more. No, no, no. I repeated the word over and over, reeling back. No more. I panted, unable to catch my breath. My magic pulsed inside of me, and I couldn't push it down, no matter how hard I tried. Mom, what did you do? I didn't do anything. She sounded much calmer than she had a right to be. I only shared my vision with you. I staggered further away from her, toward the doors that led out into the hallway. No. I needed to fly, to bring out my dragon shifter. He would push away my magic, burn it away. He always had before. Anthony, where are you going? Mom called out behind me, but I kept going, staggering down the hallway, dragging my left foot that for some reason didn't seem to want to work. Finally, I made it to the balcony doors, and there I stopped to strip off my clothes. I was in my working clothes, so my sweater and shirt, then jeans, soon hit the ground. Anthony! My mother's voice was getting closer now as she rushed after me. I didn't want to deal with her. Not now. I'd trusted her when she asked me to, and now I was verging on the edge of losing control. I grabbed for the door handle and pushed it open. The cold air of winter hit me in the face, and I stumbled out into the snow. The Black Mountains were cold, but nothing like the North Kingdom. The Winter Palace. With thoughts of heading to my friend Stavrock in my mind, I let my dragon shifter take over my quickly freezing body. My wings extended from my back, my skin shifting into scales and rock-hard muscles. I closed my eyes, enjoying the rush of power and strength that my dragon gave me. I extended my wings and stepped up onto the balustrade, launching up into the wind just as my mother pushed open the door and shouted at me. You need to act now, Anthony. There's no time. But I wasn't listening to her. Not today. I flew high, away from the kingdom of the Black Mountains and toward the north. Toward the Winter Palace. Away from my mother and her magic. If only I could get away from mine as easily. Chapter 2. Charity. My name didn't suit me, but no one needed to know that. Not until they had to know, of course. Can I help you, sir? I asked the bristling hog in front of the reception desk. Yes, you can get your manager for me. Now. Ah, yes. You want a white, middle-aged man, don't you? I am the manager, sir. And you're upsetting my staff. So, how may I be of assistance? I ran the largest restaurant in town. My staff were mostly women. Moms who needed extra cash or time off from their families, or high school girls who wanted work after school. You can get me a table. Now. I glanced over at my concierge, Tanya, a mom with 5 sons who had the patience of a saint. Even she looked harried and annoyed. I glanced down at our books, even though I knew we didn't have a table to spare. I'm sorry, sir. We're booked out this evening. I didn't offer him a seat at the bar or an alternative night. Tanya would have done so already, and it was obvious that he'd already tried to push his way in. No, I want a table now. I have clients here from the city, and this is the only decent restaurant in town." I glanced behind the huge lug, and there were 3 other suits, all staring at their phones, ignoring his boorish behaviour. "I understand, sir. Would you please excuse me for a moment?" I tilted my head at Tanya, and we stepped out of earshot. Okay, so 2 choices. I can kick them out, obviously. Or we can offer them the private corporate room. Tanya snorted. "I offered him the private room, not that he deserved it, but he shut me down. Too expensive." I grinned at her. "Perfect." I would have loved to have just thrown him out on his arse, and I still might be able to, but I had a much more fun card to play now. "Go check on the staff and kitchen for me. I won't be long." Tanya hurried off, and I stepped back to the desk with a grin firmly in place. "Good news, sir." I raised my voice for his corporate clients to hear. "Our private room is available for your party. I'm sure you want to spoil your guests with the best of what our little town has to offer." I batted my eyelashes at him and directed my smile at the other men who'd walked up behind him. "Barry, have you got a table? We're starving." I put on my brightest smile as Barry huffed and puffed. "Oh yes, gentlemen, this way. Barry has booked our corporate room. You'll have privacy and space." And a $500 bill just for the room. I stared at Barry, daring him to refuse the only available table. He nodded. "Yes, chaps, you're in for a treat." Then he stared straight at me. "The manager herself will be serving us in the private room. The cost surely dictates such service." I had the best staff on tonight, being a busy Saturday night, so unless the kitchen caught on fire, they wouldn't need me too much. "Of course, sir," I said smoothly. "This way." I walked the party of 4 to our only private room, seated them, and gave them all menus. "I'll be back soon with the specials and to take your orders." Barry was an ass, but his money was as green as anyone's. The rest of the night went amazingly fast. Between managing the staff and our temperamental chef, I was busy enough. Add in Barry and his clients, and the bottles and bottles of wine they consumed, I was run off my feet. Barry picked up the bill with only a slightly grudging manner, and the men he dined with left me a nice tip. It was, all in all, a good night. "Thanks, everyone. You did great tonight." I waved off the staff and sat down to look at the reservations we had for the following evening. "Thanks for taking care of that guy for me, Charity," Tanya said, as she slung her handbag over her shoulder. "Oh, you know it's no problem," I answered with a smile. "I'm always there for you." It was the biggest payoff for me with this job. The staff were underpaid, but between good tips and a good working environment, I hoped I helped to make up for any negatives. The staff went home, then it was time to lock up. Part of me had expected retribution from Barry for tricking him into paying for a very expensive dinner, but he'd been so jolly by the end of the evening, he'd practically rolled out the front door. I locked up and stepped out into the cold night. My apartment was only a few doors down, luckily. I hurried along the street, keeping an eye out for anyone and anything that might be a danger. Even in a small town where I knew every second person, it still wasn't totally safe for a woman at night. I reached my building's front door, opened up, raced inside, and locked it again. My heart had been pounding too fast, again, and I was a little disappointed with myself. Despite the fact that I'd taken self-defense classes since I was young, I was too aware that I didn't have much hope against a man with a knife or a gun. Feeling truly safe was a luxury I'd never had. I climbed the stairs to my second-story apartment and took deep breaths to slow my heart rate. It was almost 2 a.m. and I was exhausted. Even so, I had a quick shower, washed off all my makeup and the staleness of a long day. Once clean, I made myself a cup of peppermint tea, put on my warmest pyjamas, and climbed into bed. I clung to my mug of tea and glanced over at the romance novel I was reading. It lay on the bedside table, tempting me, but the time was moving toward 3 a.m. now. Did I really need to read more tonight? If I was being honest with myself, part of the reason I was putting off going to sleep was because of the disturbing dreams I'd been having lately. The book I was reading was a paranormal romance novel featuring dragon shifters and princesses. And ever since I'd started reading, I hadn't been able to stop the erotic dreams. I wasn't even up to a sexy part of the book yet, but with every page I devoured, it felt like I was drawn into the world, and as soon as I was asleep, I was in that castle. I became the princess in the storybook, being ravished by a sexy dragon prince. After an internal debate about the need for good quality sleep, I didn't reach for the book. Instead, I drank the rest of my tea, pulled up the warm blanket on the bed, and snuggled down beneath the covers. If I didn't read anything tonight, then surely I wouldn't wake in a hot sweat. It was sad that my dreams far surpassed anything I'd ever experienced in reality. I closed my eyes and relaxed into my fluffy pillow. I was as single as a dollar bill, and that wasn't changing any time soon. Perhaps I should start looking forward to these dreams. After all, I thought, as I began to drift off, they were probably the closest thing to romance I was ever going to experience. I covered my face with my hands, my forehead hot to the touch and slick with sweat. Not again! I squeezed my thighs tightly together, drawing out the after sensation as a beautiful lethargy stole over my body. Sleep beckoned. Deep and satisfied sleep this time. I rolled onto my back, truly exhausted now. Please let me sleep. And I did. I slept through until lunchtime the next day, my dreams still haunted by those beautiful blue eyes, with the purple mist circling within their depths. Chapter 3. Anthony. Flying to the North Kingdom could be dangerous for a dragon from a warmer climate. Damon and his family were ice dragons and were acclimated to the freezing weather. It was only the beginning of our true winter months, so the weather wasn't as bitterly cold as it would get in a few weeks. Still, I flew low to the ground, staying out of the snowy clouds, and went the most direct route to the castle. As soon as I landed, I shifted to human and stalked toward the balcony doors, the falling snow landing on my heated skin. I opened the door myself, no servants hanging about waiting for visitors. They probably didn't receive many uninvited or unannounced guests. And I hadn't told the family I was coming. As soon as I was inside, a maid saw me and fluttered her hands in shock. "Oh, sire, I'm sorry there was no one to greet you. Was the king expecting you?" I shook the snow out of my hair and pulled the door closed. The castle wasn't as warm as my father's castle, but it was clean and well furnished, and definitely warmer than the cold air outside. No, this was an unplanned trip. She set aside her broom and nodded. "Let me fetch you a robe and I'll send for someone." She meant someone from the royal family, so I smiled my thanks as she rushed off to find me some clothes. "Anthony?" I turned to find Cassandra, the queen, walking toward me with a curious stare. "What are you doing here?" Cass was still beautiful, her long blonde hair streaked with silver. "Hi, Aunt Cass," I said, greeting her with a kiss to her cheek. "I had a fight with Mom and started flying. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." I wasn't entirely sure why I'd flown here, hadn't even considered going another way. Another sign my magic and intuition were growing. I pushed that thought out of my head. "Of course not," Cass said, though her characteristic smile wavered. "It's just, we're having a few issues with Veronica." I grinned and would have laughed, except for the fact that Cass clearly wasn't amused. "What?" I said, when she quirked an annoyed eyebrow at me. "You all call her the Dragon Daughter. She's always been strong-willed. How old is she now? 18? She was the youngest of our generation. Anselm was the eldest at 30. Cass nodded and brushed her hair back off her face. Yes, and she thinks she knows everything. Veronica was young and fearless. In fact, if she wasn't like a sister to me, I would have considered marrying her myself. Veronica has a good heart, Aunt Cass. Even as a child, she was a fierce protector of everyone weaker than her. Cass actually smiled this time. She protects everyone, not just those weaker than her. I gently touched her on the arm. She'll be okay. Cass huffed and shook herself. How can I help you, Anthony? The servant rushed over with a robe and I slipped into it. As shifters, our nakedness was second nature, but it was still deemed polite to don clothing in our human form. I don't know, Aunt Cass. And I didn't. I was here. But why? She smiled softly. How about some dinner? My stomach grumbled as if on cue. That would be great. The robe was soft and warm with thick fur around the collar. I think I'm taking this home. It's great. Cass laughed. Please do. Now, dinner. Cass and I joined her husband, King Damon, at the dining table in their small family eating room. Anthony, this is a surprise. How are you? Damon stood up to extend his arm and shake my hand. Thanks for having me on, well, no notice at all. I sat down and slid the chair in, my gaze landing on a beautiful fare of roasted vegetables and steaming hot pies. This looks amazing. Eat, please. I know how flying creates hunger. Then tell us how we can help you, unless I missed something and you've already told Cass everything. Cass reached for one of the pies and slid it onto her plate. He had a fight with his mom, which I can imagine would happen on occasion. Marianne is a fiery one. Damon snorted. She isn't the only one. Oh, hush, Cass said, glaring at her husband. You have to put up with me. We're fated. Remember? Like I could forget, Damon said, reaching for his wife's hand and lifting it to his lips to kiss her knuckles. It wasn't quite as bad as watching my parents kiss and touch each other, but it was close. I focused on my food, shoveling roasted pumpkin and potato into my mouth. Of the 5 kingdoms in our realm, my family was friendly with 2 of them, led by King Stavrock and King Damon. All 3 kingdoms had kings and queens who were fated mates. Meant to be, in every way. Funny how people used to think that fated mates were rare, I said, breaking the silence and grabbing a pie as well. Damon chuckled. Well, I certainly never thought I'd find mine. We were both very lucky, Cass said, smiling brightly. The happy atmosphere was broken by a slamming door behind me and heavy footsteps on the floorboards. I jumped up and turned, my dragon shifter leaping to the forefront. But it wasn't a threat entering the room, but the dragon daughter herself, ablaze with fire. Hi, Veronica. I grinned at the girl I'd always considered akin to a little sister. Her frown lifted when she saw me. Anthony! I didn't know you were here. She rushed forward for a hug, whatever tantrum she'd planned fizzling out, at least temporarily. It wasn't planned. I just started flying and found myself here. She pulled back, her hands sliding down my arms to grip my fingers. You know it's always good to see you. A vision hit me out of nowhere, like a lightning bolt thrown directly into my brain. Veronica stood by a window, beautiful in a gown of royal purple. She was heavily pregnant and smiling, obviously happy. But where was she? I recognized the windows of the castle, but couldn't place the location. Her hand rested on her belly, cradling her babe as she turned toward the sound of footsteps echoing in the room. I knew instinctively that the man I'd see next was fated for her. I turned to look, unable to resist. A familiar face stepped out of the shadows, his smile a testament to the love he felt for her. Veronica pulled away, disconnecting our hands and halting my vision. "What the hell was that?" she yelled at me. I ran my shaking hand through my hair. "I'm sorry. That's never happened before." Fuck. How the hell was I going to get out of this one? "What happened?" Damon demanded. "Oh, it was nothing," I said, looking to Veronica and hoping she'd see that I wanted her to keep my secret. Apparently not. "When he grabbed my hand, I saw... Veronica gulped, unwilling to share what we'd both seen. I wouldn't share her secret, but how would we get out of this one? Veronica turned to her father, her focus shifting. "Dad, why have I been restricted in all my flight paths this month? I tried to organise to go and see Kayla, and I was told I couldn't." Damon glanced across at his wife, then went into a fight with his daughter about her safety, and her responsibilities, and her age. I zoned out, unable to focus on anything except the magic still simmering in my veins. Since when had my magic been so unstable? So out of control? Was that what Mom had seen in her vision? My mate amidst flames that were due to my magic? My out-of-control magic? I clenched my jaw hard. I wasn't interested in finding my fated mate yet, but when I did, I would make sure that I kept an iron grip on my power. I would never knowingly allow my magic to harm anyone, especially not someone I cared about. But what if I lose control and don't have a choice? The voices around me were getting louder, and I backed away from the table. "I think it's time I headed home." The 3 fighting dragon shifters turned to face me. "I'll walk you out." Cass hurried around her husband and daughter to grab my arm. "I won't be long." She glared at Veronica before guiding me toward the door. Once we were out of earshot and walking along the hallway to the same balcony I'd landed on when I arrived, Cass squeezed my arm. "Why haven't you or your parents ever said anything?" "About what?" I asked, my stomach twisting with sudden stress. Cass stopped and held tight to my arm so I would swing around to face her. "You have magic, don't you? Like Marianne." "Magic? Me? No. No. Of course not." I'd never been asked that question directly, so I definitely hadn't planned my reaction properly. I took a breath and forced a smile to my face. "I can shift, you know that. I can't have magic as well." Cass's gaze was keen, and even though she didn't say anything, I knew she didn't believe me. She nodded. "That's true. So how did you just show my daughter a vision? And although I'm tempted to ask what it contained, I know what you shared with her is personal. So I'll somehow refrain, for the moment." I opened my mouth to rebut what was clearly the truth, and Cass raised an eyebrow as though daring me to lie. I slammed my mouth shut and didn't say anything. The last thing I wanted was to be a liar, though I was tempted. The Queen lifted her hand and I kissed her knuckles as a show of respect. "Thank you for visiting us, Anthony. Fly safe." She was dismissing me instead of grilling me further, and I appreciated the reprieve more than I could say. "Thank you, Aunt Cass." She nodded and turned and walked away. I watched her go, too many conflicting thoughts in my head. Should I call out and try to reassure her that she hadn't seen what she thought she had? Or would that just compound my weak attempt at denying the vision? I shook my head and hurried to the balcony door, throwing off the robe as I went. Despite my joking comment about taking it with me, I would never take anything from anyone. I stepped out into the freezing weather, my magic instantly warming me with a buzz all over my skin. Damn it. I hadn't even conjured it that time. Why was my power suddenly stepping out on its own? As uncomfortable as it might be, I had to talk to my mom. I closed my eyes and let my dragon shifter take over my body once more. It was time to go home and find out how to turn off this other side of me, this unwanted, flawed side, once and for all. Chapter 4. Anthony. When I arrived home, my mother was waiting for me just inside the doors to the balcony landing area with a warm robe and slippers. Our castle was well made, and my father had ensured it was well kept. However, it was mostly stone and freezing to the touch in places, so the slippers were a welcome greeting. "We have to talk," she said, as I slid my arms into the robe and tied it around my waist. "We certainly do," I agreed. "How do I get rid of my magic forever?" She gaped at me. "What?" "I don't want it," I declared. "I never have. And it's getting stronger. I can't control it as I once did." "You're not meant to control it," Mom said, stepping closer. Her voice was a little short. "You're meant to embrace it. Be grateful for it. The way I am, every day." I rolled my eyes at her. "Grateful? You know I'm not meant to have the ability to shift and magic as well. One or the other, not both. It makes no sense. I'm a dragon shifter." "You want to embrace your father's side of your bloodline, but not mine." The hurt in her voice stabbed through me. "That's not what I meant. Not at all. It's just no one else has both. It's not right. I'm a freak, Mom." "You're not a freak," Mom corrected in her harshest tone. "You're a miracle. I would have loved to be able to shift, to soar on the air." "Well, you can have it," I said. "Obviously it's possible, even though you didn't think so before." My mother put her hand to her forehead, pressing her fingers into her flesh, as though she needed to stop the headache. "No, Anthony, you don't understand. It's your inability to accept your magic that causes the... Oh!" She froze, her eyes flashing with purple as her magic took over her body. Her trembling made me flinch, and I couldn't stop myself from gripping her arms. I didn't like sharing my mother's visions, but her magic called to mine, as did my need to help her. "Mom, The vision hit me with the weight of a tree trunk. My mate was walking along the road. Someone was stalking her. She was hit from behind and she fell. He was on her. My mate was screaming. Horrible, blood-curdling screams of pain. He was hurting her, making her. I pulled away, managing to disengage from my mother's magic, my soul recoiling with rage as my dragon rose up within my heart. "Where is she?" I growled, my shifter barely contained. "She's..." Mom wrapped her arms around her body, shuddering. My worry rose, almost swamping me with its intensity. "She's at work. I can show you." She held out her hand, and this time I grabbed it without a second thought. Flashes came at me. Main Street. Number 245. A big red brick building. A restaurant. Then a grey 2-story smaller building. Blood. So much blood. I let go of my mum, scales already covering some of my skin. My teeth had shifted in my mouth and I couldn't talk. Mom rushed to the balcony door and pulled it open, standing back to give me room. "Go! Go! Before it's too late to save her." Too late? I rushed for the door, barely squeezing through as my dragon body took over my smaller human one. I leaped over the railing, dropping like a stone before completing my shift mid-flight. I spread my wings and flew across the ground, flapping my wings to get up and over the small houses of our township. The higher I flew, the more my gaze narrowed in on the Vale. The airspace I'd only flown through once, a long time ago. The gateway to the human world. I hit the portal, and tingles coursed all over my skin. Then I was through, into the human world, and immediately warmer. It was mid-afternoon, and the vision I'd seen had been late night. Had it happened yet, or was it something that was yet to occur? Should I wait it out, or go to her now? I flew lower, spying a small house in a field. A memory swam into my mind about that house, about the family who lived there and helped the dragons who crossed the veil. I made a decision and landed in the field, shifting to human. It wouldn't be good for anyone to see me in my dragon form. The ground was cool and soft beneath my feet as I walked toward the small cabin. The front door had a large sign that read, "Friend, please help yourself from the chest below to whatever clothes will fit you. We are visiting family and will be home as soon as we can." I smiled at the warm feeling around my heart from such kindness and wished I'd brought a gem or something for them as a thank you. My magic shimmered inside my hands, and I turned my left palm up and stared as my magic conjured a large ruby from my personal collection at home. I gaped at the stone. How? Why? Damn it. My magic really was out of control, obviously even more so here than it had been at home. Nevertheless, I had the gift I'd been hoping for, so I had to focus on the positive in that regard. I opened the chest and grabbed some pants and a warm sweater, leaving the ruby inside the chest while I searched for shoes. The clothes were a little tight in places, but I was grateful for the comfort. There was no quick way into town, especially unseen. So I walked, not something I did very often in my realm. We ran or flew. Walking was for short distances, usually between rooms in the castle, not into a town many miles away. By the time I arrived at the edges of town where houses with large yards sported children and pets galore, the sun was setting. A woman saw me and smiled in greeting, though she was obviously hesitant about me, and grabbed her child to her side. "Hello," I said, not stepping closer but waving instead. "I'm looking for a place to eat dinner. A restaurant, perhaps. Could you point me in the right direction?" She nodded and walked closer to the edge of her fence. "Yes, I can do that. Main Street has all of our food places. There's a bakery and a diner, and a fancier restaurant if that's what you're looking for." "And how do I get there?" She pointed. "That way, 2 blocks over. You can't miss it." I nodded and turned to smile at the small girl clinging to the woman's legs. "Much appreciated." My heart began to pound as I ambled along the street in the direction of Main Street. It was beginning to dawn on me that I was about to meet my fated mate. What would I even do once I met her? Would she recognize me as I did her? Would I be able to leave her once she was safe? So many questions, and none of them with immediate answers. My older brother had found his mate before he was 21 and pursued her with a determination I'd never seen him display before that time or since. Would I be the same? Was I ready for the woman who would be my perfect other half, the mother of my children? I groaned as indecision flooded me. Then a voice in my head whispered, "Trust." I sighed. Yes, trust the process. Trust the universe. Trust fate. If now was my time, who was I to question? Main Street was not large, but it did indeed have a choice of many shops, including clothing, baby items, and food choices. I walked along the street, forcing myself to stay calm, even though my heart banged in my chest like a bongo drum. Soon, very soon, I would see her. Then what would I do? Would I be able to control my dragon? Or fail, as so many kings and princes had done before me? My hands tightened into fists. The stories of dragon shifter kings turning into uncontrollable beasts at the mere sight of their mate had taunted me since I was a child. Some thought it was romantic, weirdly. I found it disturbing. I'd never had a problem controlling my dragon, or my magic, though one of those had become quite difficult recently. A chill stole down my spine, and I stopped. Something was familiar here. I lifted my gaze and turned to stare across the road. There it was, the restaurant I'd seen in my vision, with its glowing sign and vibrant, warm lights coming from within. My stomach grumbled in hunger, but I had neither money nor the patience to sit with my mate in arm's reach and not say or do anything. Instead, I found stairs up to a roof terrace opposite the restaurant, and there I rested while I waited for Mom's vision to come true. Chapter 5. Charity. It had been a ridiculously busy night for a Sunday. The last thing I needed was another run-in with Barry from last night, but what was another bully to deal with? I'd been handling them my whole life. I locked up, grateful for the earlier-than-normal finishing time. Sundays we closed at 10, so I'd be home and in bed before midnight. Thank goodness. I was freaking exhausted. Mom kept telling me I needed to slow down, but who was I going to defer to? There was no backup manager. There was me and my amazing staff, and the owners who lived hours away in the city and didn't give two hoots if I worked myself into the ground for their bottom line. I slid my keys into my bag and turned in the direction of my apartment. Mom had dropped off some soup today, so that would be supper when I got home. Something warm and filling on this cold night. I pulled my coat tighter around my body as the wind whipped around me. "Hey, you! I want to talk to you!" A male voice slurred the words behind me. I jumped and whirled around as a heavy hand grabbed my shoulder. When I saw who it was, my heart began to pound. "Barry, what are you doing here?" He looked drunk and mean. His hands were clenched at his sides, and his face was slashed with redness. I had pepper spray in my bag, and home was only 100 feet away. How quickly could I get my keys out of my bag if it came to a fight? "You," he growled. "You made me look a fool, and cost me a fortune." I opened my mouth to reply, scrabbling in my bag for the pepper spray, but he swung his arm so fast I didn't even see it coming. His fist collided with the side of my face, and I fell backwards. Crack! My head hit the concrete, and my vision went black as pain swamped my body. I gasped out, blinking, trying to see. Panic hit. I put my hand up to my head, and wetness met my fingers. Was it raining, or was I bleeding? "You fucking bitch!" Barry snarled, grabbing my foot and dragging me along the sidewalk. "Ow, Barry! Stop!" I tried to sit up, but each tug cracked my head back once more. My vision seemed to be returning, but I was shaking now, adrenaline zinging along my veins. I kicked out at him, but couldn't budge his grip on my leg. He dragged me into the narrow alley next to the restaurant. Dirt ground into my back, and darkness intensified due to the buildings crowding above my head. "You owe me!" He shook my leg before releasing me, then threw his jacket to the ground. Holy shit. No. "I've got cash at my apartment," I gasped out. "I'll pay you back, and no one has to know." I had to keep him talking. I had to fight. He already had me at a disadvantage, but maybe I could talk him around. His foot slammed into my belly, and I screamed as pain swallowed me up. All the air left my body in an agonized hiss. I curled up and rolled onto my side, panting for breath. My head was spinning, and I'd long stopped panicking. My thoughts had slowed due to pain and shock, and I couldn't formulate a plan of how to get away. How was I going to survive this? Barry's heavy body landed on top of me, and I cried out, pushing at him to try and get him off me. He pinned my flailing arms down with embarrassing ease and rolled me onto my back, making more pain splinter inside my head. "Get off me!" I screamed again, as his hot breath puffed against my face and his sweaty body gyrated against mine. "Never!" he grunted, grabbing one of my breasts in his rough grasp and squeezing. A terrifying growl filled the alleyway. I stared up at a dark silhouette as someone entered the space. It was a man, A very large man, maybe. I blinked, trying to bring him into focus, groaning in disgust as Barry squeezed my breast yet again. He was so caught up in attacking me, he hadn't noticed the intruder. "Help me, please," I whispered the words, unable to call out properly because of the weight of Barry's body on top of me. Hot tears filled my eyes, and I gulped as the man stalked forward, reached down to pick Barry up, and threw him with sickening accuracy into the brick wall beside us. Barry dropped like a bag of shit, unconscious. Judging by the crunching noise when he hit the wall, he had to have broken several bones. I was whimpering and shaking now. "I'm here to help you." The man's voice was gentle. He scooped me up into his arms, and I immediately felt protected. I closed my eyes and covered my face with my hands, allowing the unfamiliar sensation to wash over me. Safe. Then another deep growl sounded, and I was suddenly being lowered to the ground once more. What the hell? I opened my eyes and looked up. And up. The man above me seemed to have grown in size, and his feet were no longer feet. They were claw-like. They were talons. How was that possible? Was I dreaming? Was this a nightmare? "Do not be afraid." His voice had roughened and his words were garbled. "I will fly you to safety." Fly? His talons reached for me, and I froze as one of them scooped me up and held me tightly against the cool scales on his chest. With a single jump we were soaring up, and into the air. I began to hyperventilate, fear striking me hard in the chest as my town got further and further away below us. What in God's name was happening? I looked up, and that's when I realized what type of creature held me in its talons. A dragon. A real motherfucking dragon! And then the world went dark. Anthony. I flapped my wings harder, aiming for height, reaching for my magic to shroud my mate in the warmth she would need to survive the cold we were flying toward. For the first time, I welcomed the rush of magic, knowing I was helping the beautiful woman in my grip to avoid freezing to death. I wanted her to feel warm and safe and comfortable, and if my magic could bring her a little of that, then for once it was a good thing. My mate, whose name I still didn't know, was unconscious now, so I tucked both claws around her and held her as close to my body as I could. God, she's amazing. Gorgeous. With every beat of my heart, the feeling grew stronger within my chest. She's the one. I'd known it the moment I saw her step out of the restaurant. I hadn't known what to do from my vantage point on the roof terrace of the shop opposite. I was frozen in shock at the sight of her. My dragon had surged inside of me, demanding I claim my mate. I'd been so distracted trying to control my shifter that I hadn't noticed the man come up behind her. When he hit her and dragged her into that alley, I jumped off the roof terrace and reached them as soon as I could. "I hope he's dead," a snarling voice said inside my head. He'd touched my mate. Hurt her. I'd thrown him hard enough. I hoped with every fibre of my being that the one hit against the wall had ended his miserable life. What sort of man hit a woman who couldn't defend herself? What sort of man tried to rape a badly injured woman? A man who didn't deserve to live. I flew higher, reaching the veil that separated my world from hers. I hesitated for just a moment, worried how my mate would feel about me taking her away from everything she'd ever known. But she was injured, and my mother's magic could heal. My dragon fought my humanity back, knowing that we would be able to make her happy. Somehow we would make it right. Because now that I had her, I would never let her go. I flew through the veil, and the cold hit hard. I pushed more of my magic down through my claws to protect my mate from the snow as I flew, catching the wind currents so that I conserved my energy where I could. The Black Mountains were in sight. My home. And now, hopefully, it would be my mate's home too. I flew lower, pushing myself to fly to the top level of my parents' castle, where I would be seen by fewer people than if I landed on a lower level. I manoeuvred my hold on my mate and managed to land on the icy balcony on one leg. I shifted back quickly, catching my mate in my arms and rushing to the door. It immediately opened for me, my mom on the other side of the glass. "Come in, come in! I've prepared the bed for her." The top floor of the castle was the wing that Mom once lived in when she was the widow of King Magnic. When she married my father, she moved into the royal chambers. I didn't ask questions. My mother always knew everything. So I simply followed her to the small room where she'd once lived and placed my mate on the clean sheets. Mom pulled the blankets up and over her. "She's hurt." I nodded, my teeth tightly clenched together as anger filled my heart. Mom continued, "But not as badly as in the vision. You saved her?" I nodded once more and managed to say, "I think so." She gestured to the door. "Go have a quick shower and get dressed. I'll stay with her." "Should I fetch a doctor?" I asked, already moving toward the door. Mom shook her head and lifted her hands. White magic glowed in her palms. "No, I can heal these injuries. Go get ready. Your mate will be awake soon." I took one more lingering look at my mate, her eyes still closed. Then I ran to my bedroom 2 flights down and into my shower to wash away the stink of anger and blood. My mate would be awake soon, and I wanted to be by her side when she did. Chapter 6. Charity. I jerked awake, then relaxed into a strange sort of lethargy, almost like I'd been drugged and couldn't open my eyes. But I wasn't drugged, and I was so comfortable. In a bed with expensive sheets and a soft mattress and the most luxurious pillows cushioning my head. But why was I in a bed that wasn't mine? My eyes popped open and I glanced around, not moving any other part of my body. Above my head was a bed frame I didn't recognize, with an ornate ceiling and a light fitting that looked like it was from a historical movie set. I tried to sit up, but my stomach hurt, and I moved my hand to cover the pain. "Ow!" "Try not to move," a soft female voice said. "I've done what I could to heal you, but as you're human, you'll need to do a lot of the mending yourself." I twisted to see a woman sitting calmly beside my bed. She was beautiful and very regal-looking. With her long velvet dress and her hair pinned up, she looked like a medieval princess. "Where am I?" I demanded. "You're in my home," she answered simply and smiled at me. "I'm not sure how much you remember. You were attacked. My son rescued you and brought you here." "Your son?" The door to the room opened and a man rushed in, slowing when he saw I was awake. I managed to lift myself up a little, and the woman adjusted the pillows behind me so that I could see the face of my supposed saviour. He'd rescued me from an attack. My breath caught in my throat as he walked forward, unspeaking. He was absolutely gorgeous, with bright blue eyes and dark hair, with the kind of stare that took my breath away. I bit my lip as I stared at him. He seemed familiar somehow, but he couldn't possibly be. Where would I have met a man like this? "How are you feeling?" The sound of his voice caused my whole body to shiver involuntarily. It wasn't unpleasant, more like a frisson of awareness than a shiver because I was cold. I don't know," I managed, pushing myself up to sit higher in the grand bed. "What happened?" "You don't remember?" He glanced at the woman sitting beside me. I frowned, searching my memory for something, anything, and came up with a blank. "No, I'm sorry, not at the moment." "It's okay," the woman said, patting my hand. "Anthony, tell our friend what happened. What's your name, dear?" "Charity," I answered quickly. At least I knew my own name. I sounded like a dumbass about everything else. The man, Anthony she'd just called him, moved to the same side of the bed where his mother sat. As he moved closer, I could see the resemblance in the colour of their hair and the general aura they both had about them. They both radiated a sense of honesty and calm. Not feelings I usually attach to strangers. "Charity," he repeated, a soft smile tugging at his lips. An answering tug inside my belly surprised me, but I pushed it away and down. That wasn't the way to respond, just because this guy had obviously saved me from some sort of trauma. "I happened to see you leave your restaurant last night. A man hit you and dragged you into the alleyway beside the restaurant. I fought him off and carried you home. Here. You were injured, but not badly. We hope." I covered my mouth with my hand as memories began to flood back. I gasped loudly. "Barry! That asshole!" Weird flashes cast images into my mind. Of Barry punching me, kicking me, then a strange, shadowy man saving me. There was more, but my brain hurt to even think now. I groaned. "Damn, I have a headache." "You hit your head pretty hard," the sexy guy said. "I'm sorry I didn't get there sooner. Oh no, you saved me from a lot worse, I'm sure." Barry wouldn't have settled on just hitting me once or twice. I was pretty sure he'd been trying to rape me, and if this man hadn't come along. I swallowed hard and blinked away the tears that swam in my vision. "Thank you." He inclined his head, spearing me with a strangely intent look. "You're welcome." There was a flash of something behind his eyes. Purple on the blue. Something all too familiar. My heart lurched. It couldn't be. Oh my God! I closed my eyes as my body responded the same way it did in my dreams, with longing and tight nipples and curls of desire between my thighs. "What's wrong?" I could sense him step closer. He smelled divine, and I wanted to turn my head away so I didn't embarrass myself, but I couldn't move. He was too near, too perfect. I gulped and forced my eyes open. Be normal. Be normal. "Nothing. Everything's okay. Sorry about that." This was the man I'd been dreaming about for weeks. He stole every sleeping moment and turned it into an erotic feast for my senses. My face turned into a red, hot mess, courtesy of the blush that stole across my cheeks. I put my cool hands to my hot face and attempted to look composed, even though I wasn't. How is this possible? He isn't meant to exist. "Have you seen my son before?" The woman narrowed her eyes in a knowing manner. "In a dream, perhaps?" "How did you know that?" I whispered, sitting straight up despite the niggles in my body. The pain in my belly had mostly subsided, and, although I could sense some tenderness and stiffness in my back, I was feeling a lot better than before. The woman smiled. "Proper introductions first. I am Marianne, and this is my son, Anthony." I tried to nod, but found that increased my headache. "Have you got some Advil or something for a headache?" Marianne stepped closer. "Would you like me to take your pain away?" "How would you do that?" I asked, suspicion etched into my tone. She laughed a little. "Just with my hands. I am a healer of sorts." "Oh, like an energy healer?" I knew of some woo-woo style practitioners who could lay their hands on people and practically heal them through energy exchanges. Not that I totally bought into that sort of thing, but at this point in time I was happy to try anything. "Yes, just lay back." I did as she said, though an unease settled into my stomach. Marianne pressed her fingers to my temples, then stroked my forehead gently. I tried not to sigh, but her gentle touch was nice, soothing to the pain. "How's that?" she asked after a minute or so, taking her hands away. Any better? I opened my eyes, unaware of when I'd closed them. The pain was gone, and my head felt clearer than it had in a long time. I sat up once more. Oh my God, you're amazing! I grinned up at the woman and her gorgeous son, trying not to let my embarrassment take hold once more. This couldn't be the man from my dreams, surely. Just because his eyes were blue-purple and his face looked oh so familiar. No, it's impossible. Now, about that dream, Marianne said. Mom, stop it. Anthony gave his mum a push in the side that didn't move her, so I had to assume it was playful. Marianne grinned again. Secrets always come out in the end, just so both of you know that. She began walking toward the door. It's late, so I'm going to bed. My husband will be wondering where I am. Anthony snorted. Dad will be snoring his head off. She smiled softly again. Fine, I'm exhausted. I'm old. Let me get some sleep. She waved at me just before she pulled the door shut. Nice to have you staying with us, Charity. Oh, nice of you to have me, I responded as she shut the door, leaving me alone with Mr. Sexy-ass Dream Guy himself. I glanced around the room. Where exactly am I? Why hadn't he taken me to a hospital or the police or something? And what happened to Barry? Did you call the police? Anthony walked around the bed so he was standing at the foot of my bed and we could look at each other easier, with a little breathing room. Don't you want to get some sleep? It's after 1 a.m. I narrowed my eyes at him. Why aren't you answering my questions? Part of me argued that I should be feeling afraid, but instead I rationalized that if they'd wanted to hurt me, I wouldn't be lying in a plush bed, comfortable and healing. He ran a hand through his hair, then looked at me with eyes that shone with heat. Because I'm afraid to tell you. Tell me what? I whispered, and even though my pulse quickened, there was no fear in my heart. He gestured to the bed. Where you are. What I am. What you are. As though the words conjured the images, more memories flashed through my mind. Memories of a dragon, picking me up and holding me. Carrying me away. Flying. No, I whispered. It can't be true. It isn't possible. He couldn't be some sort of dragon prince in another world, like the one I dreamed about every night. What can't be true? He asked, his eyes flashing with the purple mist I'd seen too many times to count, in my dreams. My belly clenched with longing at the sight. I forced myself to pretend calm as I said, Please just tell me the truth. Where am I? Who are you? And yes, what are you? My heart was beating erratically now, but I wouldn't run. I needed to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Anthony sighed heavily. Mom was right. The truth always comes out, doesn't it? He was trying to be light-hearted, but my nerves were stretched tight, and all I could manage was a nod. Please. He grabbed the bed end and leaned forward, seeming to brace himself for what he needed to say. My name is Anthony, and I'm a prince. The second-born son of the King and Queen of the Black Mountains. I brought you here to our castle, my home, because I knew my mother could heal you. Holy shit. Then Anthony continued and blew my world apart with his declaration. And I'm a dragon shifter. We all are. Well, my mother isn't. She doesn't shift, but pretty much everyone else does around here. I inhaled sharply, struggling not to laugh hysterically. Say what? Chapter 7. Anthony. She didn't believe me, and I didn't blame her. In the human world, dragons didn't exist. In fact, They were considered mythological creatures written into ancient fables. In fact, those stories were most likely written by humans who'd seen one of my ancestors. You're kidding, right? Charity's gorgeous dark eyes flashed with a depth of emotion I hadn't expected. Tell me the truth. I just did. I shrugged. I saw that man hurt you and I wanted to. I shook my head. She didn't need to hear about my murderous instincts in relation to protecting her. I may have thrown him into that brick wall a little too hard, but I didn't hang around to see if he survived. I wanted to get you somewhere safe. Safe? Charity repeated the word and paused as if considering it. Then she lifted an eyebrow at me. Well, I'm sure he got what was coming to him. I agreed, but didn't say anything more. I could tell she was trying to process everything, not an easy feat with a head injury, let alone when what was being said probably sounded fantastical. If you'd never known shifters or magic, it was a pretty big leap of faith. So where am I? She asked, looking around. In your castle or something? I smirked a little at her incredulous tone. Every eligible woman in my town would have been ecstatic to be in a room alone with me, with a bed in clear sight. But apparently not my mate. She clearly wasn't impressed by my birthright. Well, yes. Though technically, I suppose this is my parents' castle. They still reign, and I'm not the crown prince. My older brother Karlak will be king one day. Not me. I don't believe you. She sat up straighter and glared at me, with all the fire of a woman who'd been lied to and was getting rather annoyed about that fact. I gestured to the window. It's the middle of the night, so you won't be able to see the whole town right now, but feel free to look out. Charity threw back her bed covers and twisted slowly until her feet touched the floor. Her gasp was audible as she looked down at herself and said, "What am I wearing?" I tried not to laugh as I walked over to the window and drew the curtains back for her. One of my sister-in-law's gowns, I believe. Don't worry, that was my mother's doing, not mine. Charity walked to the window and stared out. We were 20 stories above the town, and, in the darkness, it was hard to see any detail, even with my enhanced dragon sight. She huffed out a breath. I can't see a thing. Determined not to be thought of as a liar, I marched over to the main door. Come see the castle, then. Or you can wait for morning. Either way, you'll find out I'm telling the truth soon enough. She narrowed her eyes at me and lifted her head. I was pretty sure she would have stormed up to me, all indignation and fire, if she'd been able to. I could imagine her poking a firm finger against my breastbone and telling me off, and I had to hold back a laugh at the imagined scene. She had some fire, this one, which only made her even more desirable in my eyes. Or at least, she would have fire if she were operating at her full capacity. She swayed a little, then moved toward me slowly. Are you all right? I asked, studying her tentative movements. You took a lot of knocks tonight. She nodded, but her lips pressed into a thin line. I opened the door and took her elbow as she reached me. One short walk, then back to bed. I don't want you passing out again. Again? I passed out? Her voice was slightly breathless. Yes, once we got to a higher altitude. I'm not sure if it was fear or your injuries, but I was worried about you for a good few hours. We took a few steps before she stopped. I don't think I can. I'll have to see the rest in the morning. She sagged and I grabbed for her, sweeping her into my arms and marching back to her room. I'm not making a move, I said, trying to be stern. You just looked like you were going to fall down. She lay her head on my shoulder and sighed. It felt so right to have her in my arms. I was. Thank you. I wouldn't have made it back on my own. I placed her back in her bed and tucked her beneath the warm covers. You're not used to having help, are you? She closed her eyes, effectively shutting me out. I don't usually need help. I brushed her hair back off her forehead, unable to not touch her when she was this close. Well, tonight, just take it. Okay? She nodded, though her eyes remained closed. Okay. My room is a few flights of stairs down. Do you think you'll be all right here if I leave you now? She opened her eyes, and, for the first time since the attack, there were tears shimmering in her eyes. I'll be fine. I just need to sleep. The sight of those tears did something to my insides. I felt all squeezed tight, like it was difficult to breathe, and I couldn't stop myself from leaning forward to press a gentle kiss against her hair. Instead of recoiling as I half expected her to, she lifted her chin and met my lips with her own. Desire burned in my gut, and although I desperately wanted to kiss her deeply, the last thing I wanted was to take advantage of her when she was injured. But the imprint of her lips on mine stayed with me, even after I managed to stand straight once more. My dragon roared inside my head, wanting, needing his mate. No, I told him. Now is not the time. Good night, Charity, I managed. Then I turned and fled, shutting her door quietly behind me. I leaned against the wall in the hallway outside, my head back and my eyes closed. My heart hammered as aggressively as a dragon's wings in war, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel the same. My mate was strong and beautiful and fierce, but she was also soft and tender. My dragon was already in love, ready to claim her as ours, forever. But I had a hard job ahead of me. She wasn't of this world, and she certainly wouldn't just fall into my bed and my heart without a second thought. She would need to be wooed and reassured, and I didn't even know exactly what she needed, but I was certain our path to happiness would not be straight or easy. I stood up straight and walked down the stairs to my bedroom. My dragon wanted me to sleep on the floor outside of her room and protect her like the treasure she was. But how creepy would that be if she woke up before me and then practically fell over my sleeping form as she tried to leave her room? She already thought me a liar. I didn't want to make her believe anything else bad about me. I managed to reach my room, strip off, and climb into bed without running back to her. She was safe in my mother's old room. Safer than anywhere else in the world, human or dragon. My mother's magic filled every room and hallway of this castle. And even though the servants loved her, they also feared her power. No harm would come to my mate while my mother was queen. And I would destroy anyone who tried to harm a hair on my beautiful mate's head. I managed a few restless hours of sleep before I was up, dressed, and heading back up the stairs to see if Charity was well enough to go for a walk. When I reached the door, Mom was walking out. When she saw me, she held a finger to her lips as though shushing me. "She's still sleeping," Mom said, once she'd shut the door behind her. "Okay, I'll wait." I stood beside the door like a soldier. I wasn't letting her wake up to an empty room and no help. Mom nodded. "I understand. The fated mate bond is very strong. You won't want to leave her at all." I crossed my arms over my chest. "Then why does it sound like you have something unpleasant to say about it?" She grimaced. "Because my visions of your future haven't changed, Anthony. Until you accept your magic, embrace it, you're both on a hazardous path." I stared down at the carpet at my feet, anger rising inside my chest. I hated my magic. It made me different from every other shifter. Even worse, it made me dangerous, which my mother had just admitted seeing in her visions. If I ever lost control, I could hurt those I cared about. Kill them even. How could she not understand that my magic was a weakness rather than a strength? "Mother, you're a powerful sorceress. You can get rid of my magic, I'm sure of it. I flicked my gaze back up to hers, staying as calm as I could. I've never asked you for help before, but I'm asking now. Consult your books. See if you can take away my curse. Mom gaped at me. It's not a curse. It's a gift. And Anthony, you are far more powerful than you know. I scowled at her. Yeah, so powerful I'll likely kill my mate someday. No, thank you. If this is a gift, I don't want to accept it. I want it gone. Mom lifted her chin. All right. If that is truly what you want, I'll see what I can do. Thank you. She took a step away from the door, then froze. I think Charity is awake, she said, but in truth, she hadn't needed to tell me. I could instantly sense the connection with Charity grow stronger as she woke. Bring her down for breakfast, would you? Then she was gone. I stared at the door to my mate's bedroom, my gut tight with anticipation. Today was the first day of the rest of my life. With her. I just had to convince my human mate that it was also the first day of hers, and that it would be a good thing, not something to fear. Chapter 8. Charity. I was still inside this strange room. It was beautiful, that was for sure, but unlike any bedroom I'd ever seen before. Knock, knock, knock. Come in, I called out, before really thinking about who I was inviting into my room. The door opened, and the man of my dreams, quite literally, walked in. Good morning. I smiled at Anthony, trying to control my body's response to his presence, and failing. My cheeks burned with the shame of it. Hi. He smiled at me. Mom asked me to invite you downstairs for breakfast. Are you feeling well enough? I checked my body. I need to go to the bathroom first, but yes. Breakfast would be lovely. Anthony indicated a door behind him. There's an attached bathroom here, with a large tub and shower. Please take your time, and I'll wait out in the hall. Thank you. He turned and headed for the door. My gaze swung down to his arse and the way his slacks clung to him. Wow. As soon as the door was shut, I got up and carefully made my way to the bathroom. I was still sore, but I felt a lot more energetic than I had last night, and less like I was about to topple over. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a stranger staring back. Holy shit! What the hell happened? I was pale and wan. I had bruising around my right eye and dried blood in my hair. I looked like I'd been pulled through a hedge backwards and then thrown in front of a truck. How am I even alive? The answer was clear. Someone had saved me from a fate worse than death, or perhaps death had been Barry's intention. I didn't know. I didn't remember all the details. I glanced longingly at the shower. I had to wash the blood out of my hair. I couldn't go to breakfast, potentially with members of some strange royal family, with blood clinging to my scalp. I unlaced the bodice on the dress and dropped the heavy garment to the floor. Whoa! It must be cold here if that's what they wear every day. Had Anthony really carried me to some other town? How had he done that? A brief image of being up high, of air rushing past my face, intruded, but I tamped it down. No. Don't go there. Don't think about anything except what's in front of me right now. I shook my head to clear any lingering worries as I gingerly walked into the massive tiled shower and turned on the faucet. One thing at a time. The water quickly turned hot, and I turned around and let the stream flow over my head and down my body. There didn't seem to be any shampoo or conditioner, but there was a flower-scented soap, and I used that to scrub my whole body, then applied it to my hair. It was heaven to remove the blood and emerge clean and fresh. I turned the shower off and found a neat pile of towels near the door. I could already feel my energy fading a little, so I dressed again in the lovely sky-blue gown, but I couldn't manage all the intricate lacing. Eventually I gave up and walked back to the door that led to the hallway. When I opened it, Anthony was there, waiting for me as he'd promised. His smirk told me I looked like a drowned duck. "What?" I said. "It's not like I have this sort of dress in my wardrobe. Where are my clothes?" His grimace told me all I needed to know. "Fine," I grunted. "Do you know how to fix this?" I gestured to all the strings and ties, and he nodded. With expert efficiency, he laced me up, then stepped back. His fingers had been brisk, and yet he'd lit a path of fire with every touch. Did he feel that strange connection too? "Do I want to know how you know your way around women's clothing?" I raised an eyebrow, and he had the grace to lightly blush. "You can ask." His smirk lifted one side of his lips. "But do you really want to know the answer?" I grinned at him. "Touché." "Let's go." He offered me his elbow like a gentleman from a historical movie. I took his arm, because how could I not? Then I remembered our strange conversation last night about where we were. "Weren't you going to show me the view?" I taunted. I was sure we were just inside some beautiful mansion outside the city centre, and I would see familiar landscape when I checked outside. They had bluestone historical homes near where I lived. Not many, but they were around. This was likely one of those. "Sure," he said with a big smile, leading me to an arched window that looked out over a view that took my breath away. Oh, my! We were high up. Like, really high up. This was definitely not a bluestone stately home. I stepped closer, pressing my nose to the window so I could stare down at the village below. It didn't look familiar at all, nor did the mountainous skyline beyond the village. "Where are we?" "We're in the Black Mountains," Anthony said. "My family rule this kingdom." "Kingdom?" I twisted around to gape at him. "Where's here? What country?" He pressed his lips together and his nostrils flared. I put my hands on my hips. "Well?" "You're in a realm not far from the town you live in. We passed through a hidden portal last night. We call it a veil that sits between your world and ours." "We're in a—" I gulped, then swallowed hard. Was he saying that he'd taken me to some sort of time-travel world or something? Another realm? "What's with all the medieval clothes and stuff?" I said, gesturing to the dress I wore and trying to grasp onto something concrete. "The clothes are designed mostly for the weather. It gets cold here," he explained. "We like a simple life, but we have modern conveniences also." I nodded, registering the fact that I'd used a very modern bathroom only minutes before. "Okay, but—" Anthony put out his elbow again. "Can I answer more questions at breakfast? My parents will be waiting." His parents? "You mean the king and queen of this place?" He chuckled. "Yes. Let's go." I let him lead me down the stairs, along a hallway, and down another set of stairs. "How big is your home?" I asked, glancing at everything around me. The furniture, the paintings, the rugs on the stone floors. It really was a castle. "This place is amazing." Anthony chuckled. "It's big. How big? I have no idea." He pushed open a large carved door and preceded me into a large dining room with a roaring fireplace. Wow! I stared at the stone dragon carvings around the fire and the portrait atop the mantel. A man and a woman with 2 small sons. It was glorious. There was no other word for it. Marianne walked toward me, a huge smile on her face. "Nice to see you up and moving, Charity. Are you feeling better?" I nodded. "A lot better," Thank you. A man walked toward us, slightly taller than Anthony, and with an aura about him that wasn't quite as warm. Hardened was the word that came to mind when I stared at him. Anthony's father. Which meant he must be the king. I stepped closer to Anthony, and the king stopped beside Marianne. Charity, this is my father, King Eric. I nodded my head, not sure if I should curtsy, or even if I knew how to curtsy. So nice to meet you. And I, you. His tone was more formal than I'd expected. Come eat. Marianne reached for my hand and pulled me toward the massive table. If there's anything you'd like in particular that isn't here, please let us know. I gawked at the spread before me. Is it Christmas Day or something here? Anthony snorted out a laugh while Marianne frowned. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Anthony held out a chair for me. This is a normal breakfast for us. No way! I shook my head as I stared at the plethora of food in front of us. This is more food than my mum would make on our birthdays and Christmas combined. Not to mention the fact that, for me, breakfast was usually a coffee on the way to work. At 1 p.m. in the afternoon, because I always seemed to work nights. Everyone sat down and began loading up their plates with pancakes and fruit. Roast meats and potatoes. Pies and stews. I didn't even know where to begin. It's perhaps my fault that we eat so well, King Eric began, his deep tone even more pronounced now. I didn't grow up in the castle. Dad grew up poor and starving, Anthony said, cutting to the chase. He's always made sure that my brother and I were well fed, and he changed all the laws in the kingdom once he became king, so that no one goes hungry. Not in our town. I shivered at the emotion behind the words. Anthony was proud of his dad, and I could see why. I simply couldn't imagine the huge man in front of me starving as a child, but it brought a tightness to my chest to even think about it. I swallowed hard. It sounds like you turned something horrible into a blessing for everyone else. That is something to be commended. The king didn't say anything, but his lips turned up in his first smile since I'd entered the room. Please, eat, Marianne said, and I reached for the closest thing, a pot of jam and a plate of warm bread rolls. I pulled open the bread and smothered the warm crunchiness in what smelled like fresh raspberries. When I bit into it, I groaned. Wow, that's amazing. Marianne smiled. Our cooks are talented. I took another bite and managed to swallow before saying, I've worked in restaurants for 10 years, and this is top quality. Try some of the meat, Anthony said, gesturing to the platter not far from me. It's impressive. I dug in, eating as much as I would on Christmas Day, enjoying both the flavours of the food and the simple questions they asked about my work and my family. So, how far is my apartment from here? I asked, glancing at Anthony, then Marianne. I mean, assuming I believe your story about dragons and flying me here, which I can't believe I'm saying out loud, but how far is it to home? I laughed to show I was joking, and Marianne looked at her husband with a secretive smile. She sounds just like Lucy. Who's Lucy? I asked, taking another heavenly bite of roasted sweet potato. She's a human who married the king in a neighbouring kingdom, Marianne explained. She was pretty shocked to find out that we existed. Okay. And did her king save her from a bad guy too? Eric snorted, and I looked at him in surprise. He coughed to clear his throat. No, Stavrock stole Lucy from her doorstep. He stole her, I repeated. Like, kidnapped her. Lucy. Lucy. That name sounded familiar somehow. Marianne giggled. Yes, exactly like that. She tells the story the best, so we'll have to take you to visit her soon. I glanced at Anthony, then back at his mum. Well, that would be nice, but aren't you taking me home today? King Eric stared at his son, and I glanced over at Anthony, a sudden sense of dread seating itself in my gut. Anthony? Anthony put down his fork. I was hoping you would stay here for a while, as my guest. Well, I've got to get back to work, I said. Surely he understood that. Do you? He spoke softly, though a little stiffly. I mean, after the attack, can't you call in sick for a few days or something? I didn't like being told what to do, though he was probably right. If I was home, I probably would have been dealing with hospital bills and police right now. I glanced at the Queen. You want me to stay? It seemed so improbable. Why would they want me here? We'd love you to be our guest, Marianne gushed. We have a telephone in the main office and a computer if you need to give someone notice or let them know you won't be in. I could call the restaurant and tell them I was hurt. Find out about Barry. I suppose I could, but I can't guarantee they'll give me the time off. And I had bills to pay, just like everyone else. Not to mention the fact that I still wasn't sure I believed any of the stories I'd been told so far. Please stay, Anthony said. I'll show you our town. I stared at him, the mixture of joy and hope that I always felt around him rising up to smother the dread. I looked away so I could give myself a little breathing space to consider his offer. I hadn't had a vacation in years. And even though this wasn't exactly a holiday destination I'd ever heard of, what was a day or two out of my boring life? I lifted my head and caught Anthony's gaze once more. All right. If I get the okay from work, I'll stay for a few days. Thank you. Anthony smiled, but there was a strange stiffness to him again that I couldn't place. His parents looked relaxed and happy at my news. But my gut told me that this situation was more complicated than it looked. Only, I couldn't figure out why. Chapter 9. Anthony. My dragon shifter was angry, huffing and puffing inside my chest. I was struggling, once again, to keep him under control. My mate couldn't leave. She couldn't. The very idea that she expected me to take her home was shocking and upsetting in the extreme. Against my best judgment, I reached for my magic and asked it for help. My dragon immediately calmed, and I could think more clearly once more. Are you ready for a tour, then? I stood up and extended my hand. Absolutely. She also stood up and shot me a grin. Got to walk off that enormous breakfast. She turned to thank Mom and Dad for the meal, then glanced at me. Am I appropriately dressed? It's only... She poked her bare foot out from under the gown, and I turned to my mother for advice on that one. Mom? Mom nodded. She'll be fine, though make sure you stop and grab a cloak and a set of boots before heading out. Thanks. Then let's go. I turned, and Charity followed me out of the dining room to the cloakroom near the castle's front entrance. Would you like to see more of the castle? Or should we go straight out into the town? Can you show me how you turn into a dragon? She asked, her voice as clear as day. Her request shocked me into silence. Well? She asked after I was quiet for too long. You said you were a dragon, right? I nodded. Then show me. Her grin said she didn't think I could do it. I can, I said. But you have to promise not to freak out, especially since you asked me to shift. This was a bad idea, I could tell. But there was only one way forward, and convincing her that I was a dragon was the first step in explaining fated mates, and everything else I had to tell her. She grinned at me, her eyes sparkling with mischief. She was about to get a huge shock. I dragged in a deep breath, then nodded. Okay, Let's go into the courtyard, then. We grabbed her a cloak and boots, and then I marched toward a side door and pushed it open. Charity followed me with a frown on her face. Aren't we going on a tour? You just asked me to show you my shifter. Which do you want to do first? Shifter display or tour? A touch of impatience threaded into my tone, and her eyebrows flicked upward. I was only teasing, she said. I groaned. No, you weren't. You were wanting to prove that I'm a liar. And you're going to keep thinking that until you see the truth with your own eyes. So, you can see the town first, or we can just get this part over and done with now. She tilted her head, uncertainty clouding her eyes. Are you serious? I nodded and stormed toward the centre of the courtyard. No matter how many times I told her the truth, she wouldn't believe me. I began to strip, pulling off my jacket, my shirt, and my shoes. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, still standing with one foot inside the doorway. "I'm showing you the truth. Dragons are not made-up creatures. They are very real, and you are visiting a country where almost every person you meet is a shifter. When I shift, my clothes shred, so I'm removing them for after. I will leave my trousers on for now. For you." She crossed her arms over her chest and glared at me. "Fine. Show me." "Do not be afraid," I declared, letting my dragon rise to the surface of my consciousness. "I am fully aware in my shifter form. I'm not going to hurt you, and you can talk to me just as you are now. I will understand you." She rolled her eyes. I wanted to roll mine straight back, but instead I let go of my humanity. My body grew, my scales sprouted, and my chest filled with fire as my senses exploded with shifter acuteness. I smelled fear and heard her terrified shriek. I opened my eyes and Charity was plastered to the door. I had to reassure her, but shifting back so fast felt wrong. I bent my front legs and lay my head on the stones. My shifter heart ached to see Charity so distressed, but she would need to accept all of me as my fated mate, not just the human side. Charity dropped to the ground and curled into a ball, her arms around her legs as she rocked back and forth. I made a purring sound, which probably sounded more like a growl to her, but I was hoping it came across well. If she didn't calm down soon, I would need to shift back. Her head came up a little at my purr, and her watery eyes stared at me. I stayed in my submissive pose, wishing she would stand up and touch me. As though my thoughts had encouraged exactly that, Charity pushed up on unsteady legs and stared at me, her fingers grasping the door behind her. "Anthony, is that really you?" Despite her fear, her voice was strong. I nodded my head the best I could without getting up. She staggered forward, wiping the tears away. "How is this possible?" I stayed very still, wishing her closer. Charity took another step toward me, then extended her hand. "May I touch you?" I nodded my head again and didn't move. She took another step, her hand trembling. She bit her lip, and I closed my eyes, not wanting to scare her. Her fingers touched my shoulder lightly, acutely aware of each of her strokes over my scales as she grew bolder and pressed even closer. I can't believe it." She was whispering, but my hearing was sharper in dragon form, and I picked up every nuance. Her shock, her fear, and her wonder. Both of her hands touched my side now, moving toward my wings. I tried not to move, but it was almost impossible. As soon as her fingers touched the delicate webbing, I gasped, my wings shivering in a strange blend of ticklish pain and delight. She jumped back. "Oh, I'm sorry." It was time to shift to human. I let go of my dragon form, though he begged to stay and get to know our mate. Then I was naked and in a kneel on the stones in front of her. When I looked up, Charity was staring straight at me, her mouth open. I stood up, aware of how her hungry gaze slid over my aroused body. I wouldn't hide my desire for her, which was lucky as, in this state, there was no way I could. "You didn't hurt me," I managed. "My wings are sensitive." She nodded, and then her eyes dropped to my erection. She laughed lightly. "Clearly!" Then she gulped as if her own forwardness had shocked her, glancing behind to the door. "Would you like some more clothes?" I scooped up the pants that I'd torn and said, "The servants have cloaks. I'll just grab one." I went to move past her and she grabbed my bare arm. "You can't go into the castle like that." I couldn't help but laugh at the shock in her tone. "Every staff member is also a dragon shifter. Nudity doesn't offend anyone. It is normal and natural and part of being a shifter." My arm tingled where she touched me, but I moved forward and stepped inside the palace once more. "A cloak, please." One of the nearby guards retrieved one for me, and I slipped it on quickly. The door closed behind me, and I turned to see Charity step inside once more. My discarded shirt and shoes were in her hands. I wasn't exactly dressed for a town tour now. "I need to redress. Would you like to wait here for me?" She nodded and shoved the clothes at me. I took them, then drew her to sit down on one of the chairs in the foyer. "I won't be long. Would you like a cup of tea? Or something stronger?" Tea. Yes." I called over a servant and indicated to Charity. "Get her anything she wants. I'll be back momentarily." I gave her fingers a reassuring squeeze and turned tail. I reached my bedroom in record time, dressed quickly, then rushed back to her side. Half of me expected to find her gone. So, when I found her still sitting on the same chair, a cup of tea in her hand, my hammering pulse began to slow down. "You're still here." I was unable to hide my relief. "Where am I going to go?" She took a sip of what I assumed was a fortified cup of tea. "If you were telling the truth about the dragon shifter thing, then you're telling the truth about everything. About us being in a different realm. About me being unable to get home without your assistance." I held out my hand, and she placed her tea on a side table and took my offered hand. "Come, see the city. Then you can decide if it's such a terrible thing that you're here with us." A guard opened the front door for us. As soon as we stepped out of the castle, the cold air hit us, and she shifted closer, pressing her body against mine. "It's snowing," she said, holding out her hand to catch a stray snowflake. "I've never seen real snow before." "It's only a light sprinkle," I replied. "Today, at least. Let's do a short walk and see how you go. If it gets too cold, then we'll go back." She nodded, and together we walked down the main street and around the town, looking at the houses and shops and enjoying the bustle of people as they went about their daily business. "You said that your father makes sure no one here goes without food," she said, when we walked past a small vegetable cart. "How does he do that, exactly?" "Well, one of the first things he did for our kingdom was to lift all the taxes and supply everyone with free electricity, heating and water. The necessities. Next was food. The new council know who in town needs a helping hand, and we provide what they need. Our people work hard, and they rarely need handouts, especially with their basic needs taken care of." Charity stared up at me, then shook her head, focusing back on the road. "Wow, that's amazing. I feel like I work night and day just to pay the mortgage most weeks. It must be amazing to know that you'll always have a home and be able to keep the lights on." It was my turn to frown down at her. "You don't enjoy your work." I'd assumed she must, given she wanted to go back to it, but if she didn't, well, that would make her transition to living here much easier. Her lips twisted as she thought on her answer. I do, but if I suddenly didn't have to work to pay the bills, would I still do it? Hell no. That was exactly what I wanted to hear. She'd mentioned a little of her family over breakfast, but I wasn't sure how close she was with them. Would she miss them living here? Do you see your family much? I asked, assuming, of course, that she was unmarried. Surely fate wouldn't have sent me a woman who wasn't available. I don't see them a lot, she answered, her voice soft and slightly reflective. My parents live a few hours away. Have you seen enough of the town for now? I asked, stopping at a fork in the road where we could choose to continue to walk or head back. Yes, I'm a bit tired, actually. This way, I said, directing her back up the hill toward the castle. Would you like to rest? She was looking paler by the moment. When she nodded, I twisted and picked her up in my arms. You've got to stop doing that, she said, but she didn't fight me. Quite the opposite. She lay her head on my shoulder and sighed. When you stop looking like you're going to fall down, I'll stop picking you up. She laughed lightly, but didn't lift her head. I got her back to the castle as quickly as I could and walked her up every flight of stairs until we reached her room. The continuing silence was too much. As I lay her on the bed, I tried to make conversation. Did you know these used to be my mother's chambers before my parents married? You said your mom isn't a shifter. She sounded curious, but her eyes were closing. She'd obviously pushed her limits with the long walk. No, she's something different. I pulled the blankets up over Charity, clothes and all. I didn't think now was the time to tell her about my mum being a sorceress. You can ask more questions later. You need to rest. I need to call my work, she said, but didn't move. You can when you wake up again. I wanted to reassure her and leaned in to press a kiss to her forehead. Why are you being so nice to me? She whispered, but her eyes were still closed, so I could stare at her without her noticing. She was so beautiful, so delicate, so precious. Because you're my mate. Because you're our guest, I said, chickening out of telling her the whole truth about our situation. Sleep. I'll come get you when lunch is ready. She didn't answer, so I had to assume she was already asleep. I crept out and shut the door, a wave of relief passing over me at the knowledge that she'd seen and seemed to accept my dragon form. We'd gotten over that first hurdle, but I was under no illusions. We still had many more to go before I could be confident that Charity would stay with me. My dragon hadn't sent her running, but my magic might. And even if she accepted that too, would she quickly change her mind when she found out that my mother had foretold her fiery death at the hands of my magic? Chapter 10. Charity. I woke up slowly, my head amazingly dream-free. I still wasn't sure if the man I'd met in real life had any connection to my dream prince, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. How embarrassing it would be if he knew what sort of dreams I'd been having about him. Especially if my dream man was simply a figment of my imagination, and I was projecting some of his qualities onto Anthony because he'd rescued me from the attack by Barry. I pushed the bed covers off me. They were too hot and heavy now. Then I stumbled next door to use the bathroom and wash my face and hands. When I was done, the events of the morning suddenly hit me, and I began to giggle, sounding strangely intoxicated. He's a dragon! Like a real dragon! On one level, I couldn't really believe it, but everything I'd seen so far was real. His scales, his wings. The gorgeous little town that I'd walked around this morning was straight out of a fairy tale. And this castle. It was huge, and like nothing from my own life. It was possible that I'd been knocked unconscious and was in some sort of complicated long-term coma dream, but it didn't feel like it. especially when, every time I saw Anthony, a frisson of desire rippled over my skin. That awareness of him, on such a visceral level, felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced before. When I walked back into the bedroom, a female servant was laying a beautiful chocolate-brown dress on the bed. "Hello," I said, walking up next to her and reaching for the crushed velvet. "Wow, this is beautiful." The servant bobbed a little curtsy. "The Queen thought you may want to change. Would you like some help getting into the dress?" The girl, who looked about 16, seemed sweet. "Thank you," I said. "That would be great. I'm Charity, by the way." "Elsa, ma'am." Elsa helped me into the dress that somehow fit to perfection. "How did you know my size?" I asked, brushing my hands over my waist and hips. She smiled. "The Queen guessed your measurements, and then I made this for you. If you would like a different colour or fabric, I can make you another." I grinned at her. "Oh no, this is perfect. Thank you." "But what about tomorrow, ma'am?" Elsa asked, blinking at me. Tomorrow? Was I staying tomorrow as well? "Yes, as Prince Anthony's mate. Surely you would like a whole new wardrobe." The girl stared at me expectantly. "Mate," I repeated, my heart sinking in sudden foreboding. "What does that mean?" Elsa cocked her head and frowned at me. Then she gasped. "Oh, I shouldn't have said anything. You're a human, and you must have different names for things. I misspoke. Please forgive me." She bobbed again and ran from the room. I stared after her, feeling slightly numb and a little stupefied at the same time. "Mate?" I repeated it out loud. "She doesn't mean like a friend or—" I shook my head. I knew next to nothing about this world, and I needed to ask Anthony what she meant. Memories of Anthony's beautiful purple-blue eyes within the dreams I'd had before I met him came back to haunt me. I needed to find out more about that, too. So many questions, so much uncertainty. Work! I couldn't believe I'd forgotten. I had to find a phone. There was a knock at the door, and I walked forward and pulled it open. There was my dream man, right in front of me. Oh, the things I've dreamed those lips have done to me. "Lunchtime," I managed, though my voice caught in my throat. He inclined his head in a short nod, watching me carefully, but he didn't say anything as I walked out of my room. "Can you take me straight to your phone?" "Sure." He'd stiffened up again, as he did every time I talked about home. I made a mental note to ask him about that later, but right now I needed to focus on the phone call. He led me along a warren of hallways to a large and light-filled office. I was surprised to find a modern computer, desk, and multiple cell phones plugged into the power board. "Wow, you guys might live in a castle and wear medieval clothing, but you're really set up in a tech sense." His grin was brief and disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. He gestured to the bank of cell phones. "Please, use whatever you need." His arm was vibrating strangely, so I let go of him, picked up one of the phones and called the restaurant. Tanya answered. "Tanya, it's Charity. How's everything going there?" "Charity! Oh my God, you're all right! Thank goodness! Where are you? What happened?" I pulled out the desk chair and sat down, noting the fact that Anthony was hanging around and appeared to be listening intently. "I'm away," I hedged. "I was attacked after work the other night, and someone found me and saved me." There was silence on the phone. Then Tanya whispered, "Was that the night one of our diners was attacked? Barry, I think his name was." "I'm not sure," I said, my stomach tight with tension. "I don't remember much, because I was hit in the head multiple times." "Why? What happened to Barry?" "You were hit in the head!" Tanya exclaimed. "By who?" I don't know, I lied. But it could have been the same person. What happened to Barry? He was attacked too, Tanya said. He's unconscious in hospital at the moment, with a cracked skull and broken ribs. They don't know if he's going to come out of the coma or not. I closed my eyes, a strange wave of feeling washing over me. Was it happiness or apprehension? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't sorry that Barry had been so badly injured. Not when I knew what he'd tried to do to me. That's no good, I managed at last. When are you coming back? Tanya asked. The restaurant's been struggling without you. My gut twisted this time, guilt hitting me hard. I probably need another day, Tanya. I'm still recovering from the attack. Oh, shit. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I didn't think about that. I'll tell the big bosses that you need a week, and that'll make them send another manager from the city. Or should I say 2 weeks? Then they definitely won't say no. I opened my mouth to say that I didn't need a week, let alone 2. But Anthony wandered over to the desk, his eyebrows raised high. I could sense his interest in the discussion, and it made me hesitate. Tell them I need 2 weeks, Tanya, I said with a gulp, as I turned away from Anthony's intent look and focused on the book-lined wall to one side of the desk. Then at least they'll send you a decent manager. If I'm better sooner than that, I'll just come back in. That was the best solution. It gave me some time to work out what I'd fallen into over here, and my restaurant and the staff would be well handled. Ask for Marie, I added. She's tough, but fair. No problem, Tanya said. I will. You just get better, Charity. Don't worry about us. I huffed out a laugh. I always worry about you, Tanya. She giggled into the phone. I'm fine. Oh, I have to go. Delivery truck is here. Okay, go. Talk to you later, I said, and she hung up seconds later. I sat still for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. They were fine without me. They wanted me there, sure. I made things easier for them all, but they'd survive without me, right? 2 weeks. Anthony's hopeful voice sounded in the room. I put the cell phone down, turned in the swivel chair, and stood up. Yes, but that was more for the sake of my staff than anything else. If I have less than a week off, my bosses won't replace my shifts. They'll just expect the staff to pick up the slack, and they can't. They need a manager. I'm glad you're going to stay a bit longer, Anthony said, his voice soft now. Almost too quiet. I was worried after this morning that you might wake up from your nap and demand to be taken home. Why? I asked, shaking out my heavy skirts. Because you turn into a dragon. I shrugged. I'd dreamed of a lot worse things to admit. It's all good. Lunch? Anthony's eyes widened as if I'd shocked him, but then he nodded and we walked to the dining room, where a table was set for 2. Your parents aren't joining us? He held out a chair, and I sat down, admiring the simple yet beautiful fare. My parents flew to a neighbouring kingdom after breakfast this morning to visit my older brother who's living there with his wife at the moment. I nodded as though I understood, though I didn't. So, all the princes and princesses marry each other? To keep the royal bloodlines pure or something like that? Anthony chuckled and reached for the jug of water. Hardly. We each marry our fated mate, if we're lucky enough to find them. My brother just happened to be fated to a princess, whereas Prince Anselm just married a human woman, actually. Someone from your world. He gulped and stopped talking, as if suspecting that he'd said too much. I stared at him, my heart pounding a little faster. There was so much to unpack now. From the look on his face, he hadn't meant to blurt all that out, but it was obvious there was no subterfuge in his response. What's a fated mate? That was my first and most important question. Anthony began scooping food onto his plate, dropping his gaze so he was no longer looking at me. "It's the word we use for the person you're meant to marry. The one fate has chosen for you. Together, you're perfect. Like a soulmate. Two halves of the one whole." There was so much emotion in his voice, I struggled to hold myself together. Was that what the maid had been talking about? I took an even breath and carefully asked, "Do you have a fated mate, Anthony?" His gaze came up and clashed with mine, purple mist swirling in his blue eyes, like magical fog. My breath caught in my throat at the answer in his eyes. No, it couldn't be. "But I'm human," I whispered. "You can't mean—" "Yes, it's you." There was a deep growl behind his words. When he stood up, his chair scraped on the floor and he leaned forward, a soft rumble echoing in the room. It sounded like a purr, only not like any purr I'd ever heard before. I jumped to my feet and started backing toward the door, the hairs on my neck beginning to prickle. This is just like in my dream. And even though I knew I'd excited the hunter in Anthony, I couldn't stop from turning tail and running from the room. A squeal caught in my throat as I ran down the hallway and raced into a room I'd never been in before. My heart was pounding and my whole body was shaking as I twirled back to face the door. And froze. I'd found the library. The doors banged open behind me and Anthony prowled inside, big and strong and far too sexy for the confined space. My breath was already short. His presence added to that, and I suddenly found it immensely difficult to breathe. I turned to run, and he grabbed me from behind, one arm locking across my chest, the other snaking around my hips. He held me captive against his big body and whispered in my ear, "Why are you running?" I gasped as his voice, like every dream and fantasy I'd had before now, made my insides turn to molten lava. I wriggled against his body, feeling his erection press into the small of my back. "Why are you chasing me?" He spun me around, picked me up, and carried me over to the desk in the center of the room. He set me down, and I opened my legs for him to step between them, our movements as natural as breathing. As though we'd done this dance 1,000 times before. My hands slid up his arms until I could cup his jaw and bring him close. He stopped inches away from my mouth, and I pulled on him, wanting him closer. On top of me. Inside of me. "I have so much I need to tell you." His voice was a whisper, his eyes exactly as I remembered from my dreams. All blue and purple swirls, intense and full of desire. I shuddered with the erotic memories of my dreams gone past. "Later," I whispered back, lifting my chin so that my lips were a breath away from his. "Now, I need you to kiss me." When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were the most purple I'd ever seen them. I cupped his face and stared at them. "God, you're beautiful." He chuckled and gently prized himself out of my arms and back to standing, though he still stayed between my thighs. "You're the one who's beautiful, Charity." He said the words with such reverence, as if he meant it. The way he stroked my body as he spoke made me believe him even more. I smiled up at him, feeling the need to be real and honest. "It was your eyes," I sighed. "I've been dreaming about you for so long. And I knew it was you." "How did you know it was me?" Anthony whispered, already pulling away. I sat up, confused. "Because of your eyes. The purple swirls in your eyes." Chapter 11. Anthony. I pulled up my trousers and fastened them quickly, fear whistling through my veins. "What do you mean, purple? I have blue eyes." I knew exactly what she was talking about, of course, and yet everything inside of me shouted out in denial. I was a dragon shifter, not a sorcerer. I didn't want my mother's curse. I didn't want purple eyes. Charity pushed her skirts back down and covered her creamy thighs, then hopped off the desk. What are you getting all upset about?" She was right. I was upset, and I couldn't put a lid on it. I grabbed for my shirt and my jacket, trying to distract myself by dressing so that I would have the chance to calm down. It didn't work. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," she snapped. "1 minute we're having this beautiful moment when I'm telling you something important, and then you—" She waved her hand around instead of finishing. "What?" I demanded, whirling on her. "What did I do wrong?" She frowned. "I don't understand what's going on right now." My throat closed up, and I pushed the feeling of anxiety away. "Do not." I shook myself, the need to fly away from here clamping down on me. She didn't understand that I needed to leave. I had to, before I shifted inside this small room and hurt her. I ran for the door, and she followed me. I ran through the foyer and onto the palace steps. There, I let my dragon take over. He filled me up, my magic pulsing with too much intensity to contain. No, I didn't want magic. It was a curse. My freakish DNA. I let my shifter take hold of my body, my mate standing on the top step of the castle stairs, staring at me with obvious confusion as I opened my wings and took to the sky. When would I be finally able to be me? When would she be safe from me? When would my mother take away this curse and give us the chance to be together? I flew and flew until my body ached and my heart hurt, and then I turned around and glided all the way home. When I finally arrived and shifted back to human form, I could barely lift my arms. It was dark, and the inside of the castle roared with the heat of various fireplaces, all lit and crackling with local firewood. "Can I help you to your room, sire?" asked Thomas, one of our servants. I shook my head wearily. "No, but thank you." I could have used the help, but I was too ashamed to take the strength the servant offered. Charity was going to hate me when she found out that I'd lied to her. About my magic and our bond and everything. And even if I hadn't directly lied, I'd deliberately kept the truth from her, and that was just as bad. Despite my exhaustion from the flight, I managed to get to my bedroom and practically fell into the shower, making the water as hot as I could stand it in an attempt to wash away my thoughts. Despite the heat of the shower, I couldn't stop shaking. My body felt like the cold had filled my bones with ice. Eventually, though, the hot water pummeling me from the showerhead defrosted me slowly, all the way to my core. I stayed under the steady stream until I could no longer stand. Instead, I sat on the tiles beneath the heat. Exhausted. Devastated. Empty. What had I done? "What in dragon's name are you doing?" A loud voice interrupted my reverie. Karlak? What was my brother doing here? "Well," he demanded again, stomping into the bathroom and leaning into the shower to turn off the tap with an angry flick of his wrist. "You've used a whole kingdom's worth of water. Were you seriously that dirty from your flight?" I stared up at my older brother, shocked that he was back home. I'd thought he was away, and quite frankly, he was the last person I expected to see. Worry and misery coursed through my veins, making it almost impossible to speak. "Karlak, guy." He offered me a hand, and, when I accepted, hefted me to my feet. "Let's get you dry and warm and into bed. Seriously, Anthony. I leave the castle for a single month, and your whole life apparently falls off the edge of the world." My brother grumbled away, shaking his head and acting like an old mother hen. I didn't stop him. In fact, the fuss was reassuring in a strange way. Karlak was 3 years older than me and had always been the classic older brother. The intelligent, overly confident boy who everyone knew would one day be the king of his people. He was the responsible one, not me. I'd never had to be, as the perennial prince. Finally, as he pulled back the covers and pushed me into bed, I found my voice. "How are the twins?" I asked. "They're fine. Don't worry about my family, little brother. Worry about yours." "Mine?" I said, confused. "I don't have a family. Not like that, anyway. Not past my parents and brother. My mate would never love me, now that she knew what sort of monster I was." Karlak dragged a chair from a corner of the room and set it beside my bed. There he sat, his brow furrowed and twisted, as he stared at me with obvious concern. "Not yet, you don't," he said. "But you have a mate, and if you're lucky, you'll have a child soon enough. What are you doing flying around aimlessly until you're so exhausted you can barely make it back home?" I shuffled in bed to hide my discomfort, rearranging the blankets. I hated hearing the disappointment in his voice. "How do you know all that?" "Mother had another vision," Karlak said, as though that was a run-of-the-mill type of thing. It was for our family, but if Charity heard him, what would she think? "She's worried about you. And she's even more worried about what's going to happen between you and Charity." I sighed and let my head fall back against the pillow. "Thank you for coming to check on me, brother, but I'm okay. I just needed to fly today. To get out. Get away." Karlak groaned and muttered something incoherent. I lifted my head and met Karlak's angry gaze. "What are you running from?" He blasted the question at me, his words now clear as day. "Seriously, Anthony, you're always hiding and keeping yourself in check. For what? You're not the crown prince. Of the two of us, you're the one who's meant to be the wild one. You're meant to be having fun. What are you so worried about?" I couldn't answer him. I didn't want to. But my magic had other ideas. It swelled inside of me, seeking a place amongst my family, where it had always wanted to be. "Karlak, Whoa! What's happening with your eyes?" He craned his neck to look closer, and I jerked away, staring down at my lap. Fury rushed through me at my magic's betrayal. It was meant to disappear, to die a quick death. And yet it seemed to be growing stronger, more out of control than ever before. "It's nothing," I muttered, not daring to look up. Karlak grunted. "Your eyes used to do that magic thing when we were kids, you know. Same as Mom's. I just didn't say anything." My head came up fast. "What do you mean?" Karlak rolled his eyes. "I'm your brother, Anthony. I shared a room with you. Did you seriously think you could hide your magic powers from me?" "I don't have magic," I exclaimed, even though I knew it was stupid to deny something he was obviously aware of. When it came to my magic, my default setting seemed to be to lie about it. Karlak glared at me. "You're sitting there lying to my face when we both know the truth. I can't believe it." He got up, flicked his jacket to straighten it, and stalked toward the door. "Hey, where are you going?" I called out. "Did you seriously just fly all the way home to call me a liar, then leave again?" Karlak turned to stare at me. He would be a great king when the time came. He'd been able to cow just about anyone since he was 6 years old with that look. "You are a liar, Anthony," he said, more gently than I expected. "You just lied to me, but saddest of all, you're lying to yourself." Shock coursed through me at his words. Shock and shame. He was right, but denying my magic was so ingrained I didn't know how not to do that. He shook his head when I didn't respond. I came home to see if I could help you, but it's obvious you're past the point of no return." When Karlak turned to leave again after delivering that cryptic pronouncement, I groaned. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means grow up, Anthony," Karlak snapped. "Face up to your demons, acknowledge who you are and stop being afraid of it, claim your mate, and seriously, grow the fuck up." Then he left and slammed the door for good measure. I sat amongst my warm blankets staring after him, my cheeks blazing. Everything he'd said was correct. I was a lying, spoilt and immature prince, and it was time I grew up. Is that how Charity saw me too? I needed to go see her and check if she was okay. I threw back the covers and rushed to throw on some clothes. Where was Charity right now? When I'd left her, I froze, one leg in my pants. The full impact of what I'd done to her hit me like a lightning bolt. Oh my God. I'd made love to her, then abandoned her. Worse, I'd rejected her by flying away without a backward glance. All because I was afraid of showing her my true self, including the magic inside of me. But Charity wasn't of our world. To her, shifting into a dragon most likely seemed magical. Why would she be worried about whether I had a different kind of magic to other dragon shifters? If she hadn't judged me for morphing into a dragon, why would she judge me for anything else? And Karlak, fuck me. When had he worked out I had the same powers as our mother? Why hadn't he ever said anything? I'd lied about my magic for so long I felt trapped, and the longer it went on, the more terrified I'd been that I would be revealed to be a liar. But I was lying, and he'd always known it. And yet, he'd never stopped caring about me. How had I fucked up so royally? I owed my brother an apology, but my mate was my #1 priority. I finished pulling on my pants, cold chills of dread creeping down my spine. I needed to find Charity, and now. Memories of our lovemaking began to thump into my brain. Damn it, the time we spent together in the library, however brief, had been the single most amazing experience of my life. And I went and fucked it all up. As soon as my sweater was over my head, I ran for the door. I pulled it open, slowed to a jog, and headed for the stairs that led back up to my mother's old tower. Would Charity still be there? When I reached the door to her room, my heart was pounding. But I didn't stop to think. I would only start second-guessing. Instead, I knocked loudly, then pushed the door open, ready for a book to be thrown at my head, or something like it. The sight before me broke my heart in two. Charity was lying on the bed, sobbing. The sounds, clearly wrenched from deep inside her, were bone-crushing to hear. I swallowed hard, pushing the sudden lump down in my throat. "Sweetheart, I am so sorry." As soon as my words found her, Charity scrabbled up to sit on the edge of the bed, her hands clutching at the bedcovers. "Get out of here!" Her eyes flashed, and if I was reading her correctly, it seemed like she hated me. I couldn't blame her. I hated myself for what I'd done. "Please, Charity, let me explain." "No!" she yelled. "I don't want you to explain. I just want to get out of here. I want to go home." Home. To the human world. Back to her thankless job and her tiny apartment. I did the wrong thing, and I know I totally fucked up. I walked toward her, holding out my hands to placate her. Our lovemaking was absolutely beautiful, and A small marble carving sailed at me, and I barely ducked out of its way before it smashed into the wall behind me. "I don't want to hear it!" she screamed. "I've been dreaming about you for months, and you don't even care about me. I thought we were meant to be, or some crap like that. You almost had me convinced. Almost." She stopped talking, and a loud sob escaped her lips. But we are meant to be, I exclaimed, staying where I was and readying to duck out of the way again if I needed to. We're fated mates. Well, I don't care anymore, she cried. I just want to go home and get away from you. All right. I'll take you home, I said, though it hurt me to even say the words. But please, please, let me explain first. Her lower lip trembled, but I could see by her expression that she was considering my offer. Eventually, she crossed her arms over her chest and glared at me. Fine. Explain. Then you can take me home. I didn't want to remind her that taking her home would mean carrying her into the human realm, probably on my back, in my shifter form. Today had already been fraught with enough worry. She'd given me the chance to explain, so now I had to give her a reason to stay. I took a deep breath to steady myself. I'm going to tell you the whole truth, and it's a longish story. Are you okay with that? She nodded. Just get on with it. Okay, so my mother is, well, a sorceress. A what? She blinked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. To her, I guess it was. My heart started to race. I wanted to get this right and not scare her off. In the end, I kept it simple. Mom has magic. Like you being a dragon shifter. That sort of magic. Not exactly. Then, what is a sorceress? Is it like a witch or something? Sort of. She has magical powers for healing, and she can see prophecies in the future. Things like that. A gift that she considered a blessing and curse in one. A gift that I had only ever seen as a curse. Charity's eyebrows drew together as she considered what I'd said. She used her magic to heal me from Barry's attack. When I nodded, her expression cleared. That sounds kinda cool. Now it was my turn to frown. You don't hate the idea of it? Why would I? Yes, it's a shock, but to be honest, it was more of a shock to see you turn into a dragon than anything else I've experienced recently. Your mom is lovely, and she helped me in a time of need. That's pretty special, actually. Well, yes, I suppose it could be seen that way. But my mother grew up with people using her for her abilities, and she can't shift. Charity shrugged. Yeah? And? She obviously didn't understand. Being a dragon shifter is the only thing that ties us all together, everyone in this realm. My mother was alone and felt very out of place. She groaned, the sound full of frustration. Can you get to the point? I'm a human. I was a waitress who worked her way up to being a manager. I didn't go to college. I'm used to hard work and pain-in-the-ass customers, not magic and flying around the sky. She waved her hands around like she was conducting a spell herself. The thought struck me. How had she known what I looked like before meeting me in person? Could she possibly have had an ancestor who was related to this world? Charity, you said you dreamed of me, right, before we met? She nodded, then a wash of redness flushed into her cheeks. What sort of dreams? I asked, suspicious of that blush, and suspecting that we weren't simply conversing with one another in those dreams. None of your business, she snapped, confirming they must have been sexual dreams. Get to your point, she added. You have 5 minutes to explain, or I'll find someone else to fly me home. You said everyone in the whole castle is a dragon shifter, right? Even the girls? I nodded, sick to my stomach at the idea that she would even consider flying away from me. Yes. Someone will take you home, though I'd prefer to be the one if you still want to leave after I've finished. She made a circular motion with her hand, gesturing for me to hurry up. I shook myself. Get to the point. Okay, so basically I Oh, fuck, this is harder to admit than I thought. I cleared my throat. Damn it. Just say it. That purple swirl you see sometimes in my eyes, it's magic. The words were out, and I tumbled through the rest. I inherited my mother's magic, as well as my father's ability to shift. But I've been hiding my magic since forever. I don't want it. In fact, I hate it. I've always hated it, and kept it hidden from everyone except my parents. There. I'd gotten it all out. But why do you hate it? She asked, which from a human was probably a fair question. Because it makes me a freak in this world, I told her honestly, keeping it as simple as possible. My mom is awesome, but she can't shift. Everyone else here can shift, but they don't have magic. Somehow, I have both. I'm different from everyone, and I don't want to be. I took a deep breath and released it slowly. When you saw my magic after we made love, the purple in my eyes, I lost control. I'm sorry. I know you don't really understand, but I've been hiding this part of myself for my whole life, and the fact that it's now just coming to the surface whenever it wants. I shuddered. It scares me. She narrowed her eyes. So let me get this straight. You're like some super-powerful dragon shifter who just happens to have magic as well, and you're so upset by all these awesome gifts because others don't have them that you've freaked out enough to abandon me after the most amazing sex ever. Well, when she put it like that, I risked a smile at her, even as heat bloomed in my cheeks. It was the most amazing sex ever. Every kiss, every touch told me that you're mine, and I'm yours. It was perfect, Charity. So perfect that you couldn't wait to run away from me the second we were done. She swiped at new tears on her cheeks, as if angry they'd fallen. I'm so sorry. Will you please forgive me, now that you understand why? No, Anthony, I don't forgive you, and that bullshit you just gave me, well, let's just say if your parents were here, I'd give them a right talking to. My parents? She began to undress, pushing her warm dress to the floor and opening a drawer to pull out the jeans and sweater that she'd worn here. The servants must have washed out the blood and grime and returned the garments to her. She pulled on her jeans, my gaze going straight to her gorgeous body as she covered it up. I wished I'd been able to have her completely naked beneath me. I would have loved every inch of her. Those delicious breasts and curvy hips. I hadn't been able to see all of her in the library since she'd still worn her dress. She tugged on her sweater and moved to grab a warm jacket from the closet. Yes, your parents, she said, answering the question I'd forgotten I'd just asked. Her brief nudity had distracted my thoughts. How could they let you get away with lying to yourself and everyone else? I put a hand to my head, pressing against a sudden throbbing behind my temple. What are you talking about? She pulled the warm jacket on and flicked the hood up over her long dark hair. I'm talking about the fact that even children are taught better logic than that. At least, they are in the human world. You have been given this incredible gift, the gift of magic as well as shifting, and basically, you just don't want it. You don't want to be one of a kind. You don't want to be special. Well, bad bloody luck! You should have been honest with everyone from the start and celebrated your magic. You're an idiot, and so is anyone who helped you hide an essential part of yourself. She shook her head and pulled on fur-lined gloves she must have been given by one of the servants. Now, take me home. But No. She held her hand out in front of her to stop me. I listened. That was the deal. And if I'm completely honest, I think you're full of shit. I'm not going to fall in love with an idiot who spent his whole life denying who he is and runs away the moment anyone recognizes how special he is. Now, are you flying me home, or am I finding another dragon to take me? Anger and anguish flared at the same time within my heart, fighting for supremacy, combining and growing in size. My mate was rejecting me. She was leaving me. My dragon and my sorcerer fought inside my human form, and the fire they both created burned in my veins, desperate for release. Chapter 12. Charity. I could see sudden flames flare bright within Anthony's eyes. Fear struck at my core like a knife to my diaphragm. I'd pushed him too far. He was losing control. No one could keep such power inside themselves, deny it, hate it, and expect it to disappear without a trace. Even I knew that. I wasn't familiar with anything in this world, but it was as clear as the purple eyes in the prince's face that he was losing his battle against his magic. His dragon was beautiful and obviously powerful, but his mother's magic thrived inside of him too, and it had been deprived and denied for far too long. My chest rose and fell as panic set in and my breathing sped up. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and adrenaline zinged along my veins. I needed to get away from Anthony, and fast, before he did something to destroy us both. The bedroom door was still open, so I inhaled a breath for good luck and made a run for it. Flames shot from Anthony's fingers as I ran past him, catching the carpet alight. I screamed as I jumped over the fire and bolted through the door. I raced down the stairs toward the front foyer. I had to find help. I couldn't leave Anthony to burn down the castle, or worse, to burn himself up. There was a man standing with the butler by the front entrance. He looked different to the servants, taller, with clothes that spoke of wealth. I grabbed his arm, gasping for air. "It's Anthony! He needs help! Please!" The man's blue eyes trained on my face. I immediately knew who he was. "You're Karlach." He nodded. "And you're Charity." "Please, you've got to help him." Karlach started running toward the stairs. "What happened?" I ran behind him, breathless with worry. But still, I managed to call out, "I think it's his magic. It's taking over, and he doesn't know how to control it." I was guessing, of course, but that explanation made the most sense to me, especially when I remembered the bright purple sparking in his eyes as I'd run. Karlach paused at the base of the stairs, the scent of smoke in the air. "That stupid bastard," he growled, then began taking the stairs 2 at a time. I was right on his heels, my heart racing in my chest. I'd never moved so fast in my life. "Where is he?" I called out to Karlach when we both reached the top of the stairs. I covered my mouth and began to cough from the smoke. It was everywhere, in the halls, filling the rooms, but I couldn't see Anthony anywhere. "I think he's on the balcony," Karlach called, pointing ahead of him down the hallway. I took a deep breath and ran through the smoke down the carpet runner in the direction Karlach pointed. I knew I shouldn't be anywhere near this danger, but I couldn't help thinking that this was my fault. And I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to Anthony. He had lost control, all because I'd called him out on something that had been torturing him since he was a child. Wrong or not, misguided or not, he was clearly in pain. I'd done nothing to help him. In fact, I'd made it worse. In my own pain and feelings of rejection, I'd lashed out at him. Rightly so, maybe. But this was going to have devastating consequences, I could already tell. The heat of the flames in the hallway made me flinch, but I kept running. The smoke made my eyes tear up, but I ducked and weaved around the flames until I burst through the open door out onto the balcony. Karlach was close behind me. I turned to see if he was coming, but a wall of fire and smoke rose up, cutting him off from my sight. I blew out gasping breaths, trying to steady myself and stave off panic. The night air out here in comparison to the fire inside was freezing. I shivered, then turned back to see Anthony standing on the balustrade, still dressed, and no sign of his dragon. "Hey!" I called out, still gulping for breath. "What you doing out here?" "You shouldn't have come back," Anthony said, his voice a deep growl. He didn't turn around. I put my hand to my chest, my heart thundering beneath my hand. We were so far up. I had learned that this was the highest tower in the castle, and it was a long way down. "Are you planning on flying us to safety?" I asked. "Because I'm not sure I can get back the way I came." I glanced behind me, amazed that I'd managed to make light conversation when the fire was burning up the castle. Anthony didn't say anything, but I felt his anguish permeating the air between us. He wanted me to leave so he could stay here in his tower of solitude, stewing on his feelings. Time to change tack. I'd seen so much beauty in this man, and I had to find a way to reach the prince who wanted my love. He had to be inside there still, surely. "How strong is this fated mate bond you've been talking about?" I asked, shivering as much because of fear than because of the icy cold air. I could still feel the hot furnace behind me. "There's no stronger bond than that of a fated mate pair," Anthony said, then slowly turned, his eyes glowing with a silvery magic I'd never seen before. Previously, his eyes had flared purple. Was this his true magic? Was he finally letting it free? "Nothing stronger." "Really?" I crossed my arms over my chest. "Then why are you burning down the castle that your mate is staying in?" He pressed his lips into a thin line. "What was your plan?" I continued, because it was obvious he couldn't or wouldn't answer. "Burn it all and then fly away again?" He shook his head. "Then what?" I asked, desperate to know just how dark his thoughts had turned. "You were going to end it all and throw yourself off the edge?" He didn't move or rebut my statement, and my heart gave a frightened lurch. I went on, as if he'd confirmed my suspicion. "Wouldn't your dragon save you, Anthony? If you threw yourself off the edge here, would you not simply shift and fly away?" He shrugged. "I don't know. My magic is too powerful now. I can't stop it. Maybe it would let me die. I'm not worthy of it." I frowned at him, trying not to show how much his mood was scaring me. "You're really not making any sense. You finally found me, and you just want to give up on life. On us." "You rejected me," he croaked, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't want to stay with me. You want to go home, to the human world, which you have every right to do." He sounded hollow and depressed, and it brought tears to my eyes. I stamped my foot, desperate to get through to him, then regretted the action as pain coursed up my ankle. "Stop being such a drama queen! We had a fight because I was mad at you, and rightly so. You made love to me, then left me. I'm the one who's allowed to be angry, but that doesn't mean you just give up on us." His eyes burned with a fiery glow that slowly turned more red than silver. "You don't want to go home anymore?" "Well, I kinda do," I muttered. "But only because you're still being an idiot. If you pull yourself together and deal with all that shit about your magic and stuff, then I'll stay. We're meant to be together, aren't we?" I sounded like the idiot now, waxing lyrical about us being fated, but I had to get him to listen to reason. Anthony jumped down, landing on the stones in front of me. "But I'm an abomination." I rolled my eyes. "You are not. You're perfect." "Perfect," he whispered. "Well, for me, anyway." I flipped my hair back off my face. I was sweating now, and everything was sticking to me. I couldn't tell if it was the heat of the fire behind us or nervous tension. but right this second I was glad of the frigid air. "Isn't that how the fated mate thing works?" I added. "If you're a freak, then I must be too if we're perfectly matched, but I don't think that's how it is." "Anthony!" Karlak's scream penetrated our conversation. Anthony and I jerked and turned to face the door, just as a wooden beam cracked and broke amidst the fire. I cried out, falling back against Anthony's chest. "Your brother's still in there! You need to stop the inferno!" "I don't know how." Anthony sounded desperate, but he still pushed me behind him and rushed toward the flames with the obvious intention of trying to help his brother. "You do know how! You have to!" I screamed out. "You made the fire with your magic. You can use your magic to stop it, too." I had no idea how magic worked, but we had to save Karlak and the castle before it all collapsed into dust. I grabbed Anthony's arm and yelled above the sound of the inferno around us. "You said you're more powerful than you ever realized. You have to use that power to save your brother." "I'm afraid," Anthony whispered, though I heard it as clear as day. "Not as afraid as I am, as your brother is," I cried, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know where the next words came from, perhaps a mixture of my dreams and everything I'd learned since I'd arrived. Or perhaps it was simply intuition. I tapped into every bit of inner knowledge I had. Anthony needed me as much as I needed him. He'd saved my life and given me a second chance the night he found me. Now it was my turn to show him the way home again. "Stop denying who you are and step up. You might not be the next king, but you're still a prince of the Black Mountains. And you're also the most powerful sorcerer this world has ever known. Use that and do some good." Anthony stared at me for a second, then turned to the fire and roared, thrusting his arms out in front of him and calling back the flames. I stumbled back, staring in awe as flames blazed in Anthony's palms, and he sucked the fire from the tower and back into himself. The moment all the flames were gone, he groaned, falling to his knees. I grabbed for his shoulder. "Well done!" "Go." He groaned again, hugging his middle as if in pain. "Find Karlak." Smoke still filled the hallway, but I found Anthony's brother easily. He had collapsed against a wall, and he didn't appear to be breathing. Frantically, I ran my hands over him. He didn't have any wounds that I could feel or see. His pulse was thin and weak, but it was there. I rolled him onto his side and belted him on the back, but it was no use. His lungs were filled with smoke, and I couldn't clear them out. "Anthony!" I screamed. "We've got to get him into the clear air. Help me!" I jumped up and grabbed Karlak's wrists, then began tugging him in the direction of the balcony. It was the only source of fresh air available. He was so heavy, but I hefted him along, desperate to get him outside. "Help!" I screamed, and pounding sounded on the stairs as men ran to our aid. "Help me get him to the balcony!" Two of the servants lifted their future king and hauled him into the fresh air. I pressed a frantic hand to his chest. "He's still not breathing. Anthony, you've got to help him." Anthony was as pale as a bottle of milk, clearly still recovering from the effort of containing the fire, but he crawled over to his brother and set his hands hovering over Karlak's chest area. He closed his eyes and gasped out, sounding as though he were taking Karlak's pain and suffering into him, just as he'd absorbed the fire. His hands glowed with white light. Black tendrils of smoke lifted through Karlak's shirt and drifted up into Anthony's hands. The servants gasped, falling back. "The prince has magic!" "Yes, he does," I snapped at them. "And he's saving your future king's life, so you better hope his magic is as strong as the queen's." I had no idea how strong Marianne's magic was, but when the servants bowed their heads, I knew I'd said the right thing. Karlak began to cough, then gasp for breath. "Sit him up!" I cried, rushing for his back and pushing him up. The servants helped me get him into a sitting position, and he coughed some more. Finally, he opened his eyes, and Anthony fell forward, his head on his brother's thigh, his shoulders shaking with the strength of his emotions and the effort of saving his brother. Karlak stared down at Anthony, then up at me where I crouched next to them both. "You okay?" I asked Karlak. He nodded, then slowly put his hand on Anthony's head. "It's okay, brother. Everything's going to be okay." I crawled around him to Anthony, who had rolled off Karlak. He knelt in a prayer position and began to weep. I put my arms around my mate's back and wept with him. Chapter 13. Anthony. I'd almost killed my brother. I'd almost destroyed our family's home. And lost my mate. All because I couldn't control the magic I'd been born with and the rage that had built over the years. Loud whooshing met my ears. I looked up to see my father flying toward us at a furious pace. I swiped at the tears on my face and straightened my back before standing and assisting Charity to her feet beside me. Karlak climbed up too, and the three of us stood watching as Dad descended. He hovered over us and turned so that we could see Mom on his back, her face aghast. "Oh, my boys!" She materialized beside us, her arms around both our shoulders. "My big, brave sons. I'm so glad you're both all right, and you too, dear Charity." "Should we go inside?" Charity suggested gently. "Somewhere warm for us non-shifters." I turned toward the door, but Mom reached out. "Everyone, hold hands. I'll transport us down into the dining room." Charity grabbed hold of one of my hands and one of Karlak's. White light shimmered all around us. Then we were downstairs beside the fire in the grate, a bearskin rug beneath us, and the dining table nearby. Mom moved to inspect Karlak, running her hands over his face and head. Charity stood up and shivered. "Well, that was intense." I couldn't help but ask, "Which part do you mean?" She rushed over to the fire, putting her hands out to warm her palms. Well, all of it, I guess. But that transportation trick of your Mom's is very cool." "Very cool," I repeated, managing to stagger sideways so that I could sit on the large sofa near the fire. Every part of my body was slow and dragging. Using that much magic to contain and kill the fire felt like it had drained my soul. The doors slammed open at that point, and Dad marched in, wrapping a robe around his body as he did so. "What the hell happened?" I groaned and leaned back against the sofa. Where to even start? Mom and Dad got Karlak up and moving, walking around the room. "You okay, son?" Karlak nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine, Dad. Thanks to Anthony and Charity." I gripped my head, then dragged my hands down my face. "The only reason you were in danger in the first place was because of me, brother." Karlak turned to stare at me. "I'm a dragon. I know better than to try and charge through an out-of-control fire, then get overwhelmed by the smoke. I could have turned back and headed downstairs to get help. I was stupid." My face heated with shame. "You weren't the stupid one." I stood up. "I'm sorry, brother." I took a step forward with my arms open, and Karlak rushed over to hug me tight. My heart swelled with love for my older brother. When he pulled away, he smiled softly. "I'm going to rest. Then I'll go home to my wife." "You're going to leave me with Mom and Dad?" I gaped at him, only half teasing. Karlak laughed. "You deserve to have your ass chewed out. But it's not Mom and Dad I'd be worried about." Karlak gave a pointed look in the direction of the fire, where Charity still stood. I nodded. Yeah, I was beginning to realize how important the fated mate bond was. No matter how mad or disappointed my parents had been with me in the past, I'd never considered throwing myself to my death. Never. But the true devastation that had come from Charity walking away from me had been overwhelming. Mom walked over to me, reached out, and gripped both my hands. "Your magic got out of control." I glanced over at Charity, who was watching me carefully, like she wasn't sure what to make of me anymore. I nodded. Yes, it felt like. I wasn't sure how to explain it, but I owed it to everyone to try. Like my dragon and my magic were fighting a battle deep down inside of me, and I couldn't get either one of them to calm down. Mom smiled gently. "It actually sounds like your magic won the battle for once. You generally shift to squash your magic down and push it away, don't you?" I gulped, my throat tightening. I didn't like the idea that my magic had defeated my dragon, but I hadn't shifted. So what was the answer? Mom turned to Charity, let go of one of my hands, then gestured for my mate to come closer. "May I see what happened from your perspective, Charity?" See? Oh, crap. Charity crept forward, her arms crossed over her chest. "Yes, you may. What do I need to do?" "Just hold my hand," Mom said. "And I'll look into your memories, if you allow it." Charity's gaze slid to mine, and I gave her a stiff nod. "It's safe, but if you feel uncomfortable—" "I'm not uncomfortable with your mother's magic," Charity declared, lifting her chin and daring me to comment. "Please do whatever you need to." Mom grabbed both of our hands, and although I tried to pull away, she didn't let me go. I closed my eyes and tried to lift a magical shield against the visions my mother was about to share with me. I wasn't sure I was ready to see myself in that state. But my magic was untrained and weak when compared to my mother's. Into my head flashed feelings of fear and anger, but also a deep sense of needing to help. Love, even. Maybe. There was Charity, rushing through the smoke and fire, talking me down off the ledge, seeing my magic, wanting me to make the right choice. Then she was saving Karlak, dragging him along the stones. My magic shimmered on my brother's chest. Smoke filled the air. Mom let go of my hand and staggered forward, grasping the couch for strength as she coughed and cried out, then sobbed. "My babies!" Dad wrapped her in his arms, holding her tight and whispering sweet words of reassurance and love. I glanced at my mate, who was watching my parents together with a look on her face that spoke of shock and wonder. Their love was epic, the stuff fables were written about. I'd grown up around it and considered that sort of devotion normal. But from that look on Charity's face, she'd never seen such a love before. It was the love of a fated mate pair. The best kind of love. When Mom could stand once more, she opened her arms to Charity, who went in for a hug. "Thank you," Mom whispered, stroking Charity's hair as she held my mate to her shoulder. "You saved them. Saved them both." When Charity pulled back, she had tears in her eyes. "It was my fault. I should never have—" "No," Mom interrupted. "If this is anyone's fault, it is mine. I shouldn't have allowed Anthony to hide his magic from the world. I knew how strong he was and how upset he was with the whole magic side of himself, and I did nothing about it. I should have—" She covered her mouth with her hand, and I sighed, walking toward them both. "No, Charity, and no, Mom. This is my fault. All my fault. I've been a coward my whole life, and it's time I finally accepted who I am. That means my magic side, as well as my shifter side. Instead of accepting me, I tried to hide it. I lied. And it is time I took responsibility for those choices that I've made, and the consequences that ensued. I lied to my brother and my friends. Our people. It's time they knew who I am, truly, if they don't already. I smiled tentatively at Charity, who smiled back. Yeah, not sure how fast gossip flies around the castle, but those two guys on the roof were pretty shocked when they saw you do your thing. My thing? I laughed briefly, then shook myself. I think I'm going to need a lot more practice before it's considered my thing. Charity glanced at my mother. Well, you have the perfect teacher right here. Mom nodded at me. I would love to help teach you how to manage your magic, son. When you're ready, let me know, and I'll be there. She cupped Charity's face and sighed. I'm going to leave you two to talk. It's time for bed. Dad lifted Mom up in his arms and carried her from the room. Charity stared after them with a grin and a headshake. That's where you get it from. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Yeah, well, you're too beautiful to walk. And it gives me an excuse to hold you. Charity sobered, her expression falling. Your mum's right. We do need to talk. We certainly did. Yes, we do. Shall we talk here, or go to my bedroom? She stared at me, her eyes twin pools of shimmering uncertainty. How about we start here, I suggested, taking her hand and pulling her toward the chairs in front of the fireplace. We sat in our chairs, the fire warm on our faces. Where should we start? Charity asked, her voice a touch squeaky and uncertain. I coughed a little to clear my throat. I'll start with an apology. Though I owe you many, I'll get to the most important one first. I'm so sorry for leaving you in the library this afternoon. Making love to you was the most magnificent moment of my life, and I ruined it for both of us. Charity stared down at her hands, which were clasped in her lap. You kinda did, yes. It was extremely hurtful and confusing. Will you forgive me? I asked, around the sudden lump in my throat. She lifted her chin. I will over time, I'm sure. And now? I asked, my heart beating a little faster. I'll do anything for a second chance with you. Anything. What can I do now to make things right? She stared at me with narrowed eyes, as if considering and discarding several responses. And then she came out with the last thing I was expecting. You mentioned this several minutes ago when your mum was here, but I want to confirm whether or not you mean it. Anthony, I want you to accept your magic and start doing lessons with your mum to control it. I sat up straighter, familiar fear eating at me. I knew I had to accept myself, and that meant accepting my magic as well as everything else. It was just difficult to acknowledge when I'd spent a lifetime avoiding it. Well, You've already started on that path, she continued. Those two servants saw you save Karlak, and they'll tell everyone, surely. They might, because they knew what it meant. But they might simply keep it to themselves, thinking that's what the family would want. And I knew I couldn't rely on a couple of servants to maybe or maybe not spread the word. This had to be up to me. It had to be a conscious decision, which meant I had to do what she said and own up to everything, to everyone. What are you most afraid of? She reached out and gripped my hand. Surely nothing worse than what happened tonight. Her smile was tentative, but she was right. I thought about it, considering the situation from every angle, and couldn't quite think why I'd held on to my secret for so long. I started talking, because often that revealed the problem. When I was young, I didn't want to be different to my brother and all my friends. Then I grew older and, well, then I felt trapped, I think. In my lie. It was like the longer it went on, the harder it became to reveal the truth. And then, of course, the more I tried to hide my magic, contain it, the more it tried to get out. And my fear of losing control only grew. My heart squeezed at the realization that I'd actually created my own cage. Oh my God, I did this to myself. And everything I tried to do to control it all only made things worse. Charity laughed. We all create problems in our own heads sometimes. But I need to tell you something else. I swallowed hard. The reason I came to find you that day was because my mother showed me a vision of you being attacked by that guy near your restaurant. I had to save you. Charity grinned at me. Why would I be upset about that? I'm freaking glad your mom showed you that, or I'd likely still be in hospital somewhere, or worse. Worse, I whispered, shuddering at the memory of what I'd seen in that vision. She winced a little. Well then, even better that you did come and save me. She waited for my response, but I just sighed. She frowned. There's something else, isn't there? I nodded. Yes. Mom showed me a vision of you pregnant, wrapped in flames. She told me that if I didn't learn to control my magic, then something terrible was going to happen to you. And I've been trying even harder to tamp down my magic since then. A swift intake of breath was Charity's only reaction for several seconds. Eventually she whispered, So does that mean it's still coming? You know, when I'm pregnant? Or are we done now? I don't know. I shook my head, worry for my mate filling my chest and making it hard to breathe properly. Can you find out? She asked. Can we go ask your mom, or can you do it? My brows rose. Could I? I'd looked into the future for Veronica, and I hadn't even meant to. Could I do it now for Charity? We could try, I ventured. And if not, we can always ask Mom in the morning. She'd help if we needed her to, I was sure of it. I stood up and held both hands out in front of me. Charity got to her feet a little slower. She was obviously hesitant. Does it hurt? I shook my head. It's like when Mom viewed your memory of the fire. Doesn't hurt at all. Just give me your hands, and I'll see if I can do this. She slipped her hands into mine, palm against palm. I reached for my magic and called upon it for help in a way I'd never done before. The power lurched up inside me as if it had been waiting for this moment. It was eager and happy, and the vision hit us both so fast that Charity dragged her hands out of mine, stopping the images. What the hell was that? That's the vision. It'll be like a movie, sort of. Flashes of the future. She was glaring at me, not sure. That wasn't like when your mom did it before. Probably because Mom was taking images out of Charity's head rather than projecting them into her mind. Or maybe I just wasn't good at it. It didn't hurt, did it? We can wait for my mother tomorrow if you'd prefer. Charity shook her head and took a steadying breath. No, it didn't hurt. It was just unexpected. Let's do it now. I held out my hands once more, and this time it was even easier to draw upon the magic inside me. The vision flashed into both of our minds, and this time I held tight to Charity's hands, stroking my thumbs over her skin in reassurance. There she was, standing in our bedroom, cupping her swollen belly. Pregnant and stunningly beautiful. A wave of love for her washed over me. But what of the fire? Our future? Charity turned to look toward the bedroom door, and I walked into the room, a huge smile on my face. In my arms were 2 children. A little boy of about 4 years old was riding high on my shoulders, and another, about 2, sat in my arms wriggling like a little fish and giggling. Our family. Safe and well. The happiness in the room was a palpable, very real thing, and all of a sudden, I couldn't breathe. I let go of Charity's hands, needing the vision to end. I fell into the chair I'd been sitting in only moments before, gasping for air. What's wrong? Charity rushed to my side and knelt. "Are you okay?" I nodded, focusing on my chest going in and out. "Yeah, I kept breathing, forcing the air in and out of my body until I could finally relax once more. Charity stood and made a pretense of warming herself at the fire. "Please tell me you didn't just have a panic attack at the sight of us having multiple children, Anthony." She put her hands on her hips, obviously indignant, and I started to laugh. "No, sweetheart, not at all." I stood and pulled her into my arms, cupping her head with one hand and holding her to my chest. "No, I think I just became totally overwhelmed with relief. There's no destructive fire in your future, only happiness. For both of us. It shocked me after the last terrifying vision I saw. Something has changed for us. Something good." "Did you feel that happiness in the vision?" "I did," she said, her voice a little shy. "Yes, it was beautiful," I admitted. I'd never dreamt I could be that happy. Nor that a woman as beautiful and amazing as Charity would love me and want to create a future, a family, with me. Charity looked up at me, her face full of the longing I'd always hoped to see in my mate's eyes. "Let's go to bed. I want to see your room now." I leaned down and pressed a loving kiss to her forehead before stroking back her hair. The brief touch was merely a taste of what I wanted to experience with her. "I can't think of anything I'd like more, beautiful." I took her hand and guided her out of the dining room. It was time to show my mate how much I loved her. Chapter 14. Charity. Part of me believed I should wait before jumping back into bed with Anthony, especially after the tumultuous day we'd had. But I needed to reconnect with him in the strongest way, and I could sense that his need was just as strong. It was as if we'd climbed a mountain together and been given the greatest gift. We had discovered that we were meant to be together with almost perfect certainty. Nothing could have made me happier than to know that this man would love and cherish me forever. "So, I suppose we're staying here," I joked, as Anthony dragged me down the hallway and pushed open the heavy wooden door that led to his bedroom quarters. He turned to look at me with a silver light blazing in his eyes. "You want to return to your human world? If you want that, I will come too." Stay here and be a princess, or go back to management in hospitality? Such a tough choice. No, not for good. But to say goodbye and collect some of my personal things. Sell my apartment. Anthony ushered me inside, then shut the door behind us and turned to face me. I swallowed hard, my heart singing when I saw the intense desire that decorated his features. For a moment I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Something about my apartment. Not that any of that stuff matters right now. He shook his head. "We'll work everything out. Together. I promise." I nodded and gave up trying to remember our conversation. I took a step toward him. The room was warm, the fireplace crackling with heat, and yet I shivered with anticipation. Anthony stepped close, cupping my face with his large hands. "I promise I'm going to be better. For you. For the amazing future we're going to have." I nodded, too full of emotion to talk more. I slid my hands up his chest and wrapped my arms around his neck. The time for talking was done. His lips crashed down onto mine. I screamed and gasped for air, my whole body shaking as we shared a perfect moment in time. Anthony collapsed on top of me and then rolled to the side so he didn't crush me. "Oh my God, that was awesome." I reached for his face, cupping his cheek as I got to look at him in post-coital bliss. "You're not going to run away this time?" Anthony shook his head, his eyes serious. "Never again, Charity. I love you." I leaned forward and kissed his lips, then pulled back to tell him how I felt. "I love you too." Epilogue. 3 months later. Anthony. Charity wouldn't agree to marry me until we'd known each other for over a month. And by the time she finally said yes, she was pregnant. We had cause for more than just one thing to celebrate. The wedding ceremony had gone beautifully, and now we were all gathered in the great hall enjoying a feast. I stood by the dance floor, enjoying watching all my friends and family dancing the night away. Dad had asked Charity to dance, and he was gently spinning her around in time with the music. "Enjoying your night?" Mom asked as she walked toward me, dressed in the most royal purple, over-the-top gown I'd ever seen her wear. "I am, Mom. Thank you for everything." She had been teaching me how to use my magic, and things were going well in that regard. I still had moments where I instinctively went to stifle it down, but those moments were becoming less frequent. And now that I was leaning into that side of myself, my magic seemed less prone to spill out in unexpected ways. I was on a journey to self-learning, and while I wasn't there yet, Charity's love and positive presence and my mum's magical guidance were helping me along the path to self-acceptance. She put her arms out, and I hugged her tight. "I'm so happy for you, Anthony. You've found your fated mate, you're going to be a father, and our people know that there will be a sorcerer looking after them, even after I'm gone." I pulled back and frowned down at her. "You're not dying any time soon, Mom." She cupped my chin and squeezed. "I know. Still, you've finally stepped into being the man you were born to be. I'm so proud of you." I looked away and laughed, afraid I might cry if she kept looking at me like that. "Something I always wanted to ask you," I said to her. "Charity used to dream about me. I know she told you." She nodded. "Yes? What's your question?" "Did you put those dreams in her head?" I wouldn't have been surprised if she did. Mom raised a single eyebrow at me. "You think I'd put those types of erotic images into her mind? No, son. That was not me." My cheeks heated with embarrassment. "Then who was it?" She shrugged. "You, more than likely." "Me?" I said. "I didn't do that." Mom laughed. "You underestimate your magic, Anthony. Your magic and the fated mate bond. I'm sure it found a way, while you were sleeping, to find your mate and get her ready for you." The strength of that statement hit me like a brick. "Wow, that's incredible." "I know." She leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "I'll leave you to enjoy your night. I love you." "I love you too, Mom." She glided away, and Veronica sidled up next to me, a glass of wine in her hand. I raised an eyebrow at the girl I'd known from the moment she was born. "Hitting the alcohol now, dragon daughter." Veronica's blue eyes flared, and she tossed her long blonde hair over her shoulder. "I'm 18, she said, indignation clear in her voice. "It's legal." In European countries, anyway. "So, what are you doing standing over here?" she asked, turning to stand by my side so we could both watch everyone enjoying themselves. "Surveying your kingdom?" I scoffed at her. "Second-born son, child. Haven't you learned how things go?" She punched me in the arm, hard. "Hey!" I glared at her. "It's my wedding day. You're meant to be nice to me." She didn't apologize, but she didn't punch me again either. Instead, she went back to sipping on her drink. "It's still your kingdom, you know," she said after a while. "Karlak might be king one day, but you're the sorcerer now, yeah?" I shrugged. "I suppose. My mom's been teaching me how to use my magic, but I'm decades behind her in experience." The lessons had been going well, though I may have blown up a few things along the way. Yeah, but your mum's not going anywhere, so you have time to learn. True, I said, already having seen a vision of the day of my parents' passing. Thankfully it was many, many years from now, and I tried not to dwell on it too much. Veronica didn't say anything more, but she didn't leave my side. A twinge of something uncomfortable began to niggle at me. "What do you need, dragon daughter?" I asked, not turning to look at her. She didn't hit me, which meant she was about to get serious. "You know when you came over for lunch that time?" I searched my memory, unsure of which event she was talking about. But then it hit me. "Oh, you mean when I accidentally gave you a vision of your future?" I'd forgotten about that, sort of. I'd been so consumed with my own secrets and lies, I'd pushed that very juicy piece of information away. Ian and Veronica were twin flames of fury. They'd burn the world down with their love, if they could get past their long-held grudge against one another. And now that she mentioned it, "So what are you going to do about that?" I turned to face her and raised a querying brow. "Nothing." She tipped back her head and finished the rest of her drink in one gulp. "What do you mean, nothing?" I asked, chuckling softly. "You know who your fated mate is, and you're going to ignore him." That just wasn't done. She was legal age. He was 5 years older, maybe a little more. They were a perfect match, except for the fact that they were cousins. But surely fate wouldn't have gotten it wrong. Veronica lifted her chin. "I've taken a job in the human world. I'm leaving next week." My jaw dropped. "Are you kidding me?" "Nope. I'm going to look after some kids for a family I met online. Maybe travel Europe for a while." I couldn't believe it. "And your parents are just letting you go?" Her eyes sparked with a challenge. "Let them try and stop me." I would have laughed if I didn't know her better. She was serious. And short of locking her up in a tower, her parents didn't have a hope of stopping her. Perhaps this was what they'd been fighting about that day I'd visited. I shook my head at her. "You're running away from your future, which is very interesting, Veronica. I thought you were the fearless one among us. But I won't be the one to try and talk you out of it. Hell, I've been running away from who I was my whole life, until now. I won't throw stones." "I'm not running away from who I am." This time I burst out laughing. "Oh, baby girl, you are. You're a dragon princess. You're the fated mate of a prince. You don't have to work a day in your life, and instead of enjoying your position and doing good in your kingdom and accepting your fated mate, you're going to travel and work for humans. Makes perfect sense." I continued to laugh until my beautiful mate walked up, pink in the cheeks from dancing too long. "What are you two talking about? 'Cause whatever it is, count me in. I need something funny to take my mind off this nausea." "Dad twirl you around too many times?" I asked with a grin. She burped a little, then covered her mouth and said, "Excuse me." I put my arm around Charity's shoulders and tugged her close. "You're beautiful, even when you burp." And she was. Today had been perfect in every way. Charity rolled her eyes. "I feel disgusting, but I'm glad you think I look pretty." "You look amazing," Veronica said. "And congratulations on your pregnancy." Charity grinned wide. Pride shone in her eyes. "Thank you. We were going to keep it quiet, but the moment I hit 6 weeks I started vomiting, and, well, it's been impossible to keep quiet since." I kissed my mate's forehead and held her tight. "I think we should dance. I promise to take it slow." There was a soft, slow song being played, which was perfect for my bride's woozy stomach. "Oh, that would be lovely." Charity turned toward Veronica. "Lovely to see you again." I smiled at the dragon daughter, then lifted my free hand to wiggle my fingers. You sure you don't want another vision? Not that I'd been controlling it the first time I'd shown her who her fated mate was, but I could bring up the same images now, I was sure. Veronica backed away so fast I couldn't help but laugh. "Bye, dragon daughter." "What was that about?" Charity asked, as I took her hand and led her onto the dance floor. I set my hand to my wife's still normal-sized waist and took her fingers in mine. Long story short, I accidentally showed Veronica who her fated mate was. I couldn't control the vision, and now she's running away to the human world to avoid him. Charity glanced around the room. "Who is it?" I glanced in the direction of Stavrock's table, and Ian caught my eye with a grin before I turned back to Charity once more. "It's probably best if I don't tell you." My bride laughed. "Probably? I'm not sure I could keep a straight face when I saw them." "He doesn't know," I told her. "Well, I don't think he does. I haven't told him anyway." Charity tangled her fingers in the hair at the base of my neck. "I'm sure he knows." I frowned at her, manoeuvring her around the dance floor and making sure not to twirl her too fast. "What do you mean?" Charity stared at me like I was the one not making sense. "What happens when a male dragon shifter sees his fated mate for the first time?" Oh. She was correct. There was no way that Ian didn't know Veronica was meant to be his. "You're right. Then why?" I shook my head. "No, not tonight. They can sort out their own shit. I want to celebrate us and our baby tonight." Charity smiled up at me, her eyes misting with tears. "It really was the perfect day." It was. My arms tightened around her. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. And tonight I'll hold you in our bed and count my lucky stars that you're mine." Charity dropped her head, then stared up at me through her eyelashes. "I'm sure we can do more than just cuddle." My cock instantly throbbed at the mention of a proper wedding night. I pulled her closer and danced even slower, letting my dragon purr with happiness and desire simmer deliciously below the surface. That night I carried my new wife across the threshold straight into bed, and she fell asleep in my arms. Her pregnancy made her exhausted, and it had been a long day. I had every respect for her need to rest, and knew that when she woke, there would be plenty of time to make love. Thanks to her love, and the fact that she didn't give up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself, we had the rest of our lives to enjoy one another.